November 3rd, 1917. Colorado Rockies. Late afternoon. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, throwing shadows that danced across rough log walls like memories given form. Ethan Sullivan sat in his chair, the same pine chair he'd built 40 years ago when his hands were steadier and his back didn't complain with every movement. 63 years weighed heavy on shoulders that had carried beaver traps through waist-deep snow, dragged fallen trees for firewood, and held dying men on battlefields that felt like yesterday and forever ago all at once. Outside, the first winter wind of the season howled through the pines. The sound was familiar as his own heartbeat. Inside, his grandson James was packing a canvas rucksack for war. The Great War, they were calling it. Like giving it a grand name would make the dying more noble. The boy was 18, same age Ethan had been when he'd watched different men march off to a different war. That was 50 years back during the time when the world was simpler and promises felt permanent as mountains, before he'd learned that mountains crumble too, given enough time and pressure. James folded a wool shirt, placed it carefully in the bag. His hands shook, not from cold, fear maybe, or anticipation. That strange mix of terror and excitement that comes before a man steps into the unknown and hopes he'll step back out again. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something before I leave." Ethan poured whiskey into 2 tin cups. The good stuff saved in a glass bottle for occasions that mattered. Occasions like sending your grandson to war and maybe never seeing him alive again. He handed 1 cup to James. The boy took it but didn't drink, just held it like the weight of it might steady his hands. "It's about Sarah Miller, the girl taking her final vows next week." James jerked his head up. His eyes went wide, blue eyes like his grandmother's, like Catherine's had been. "How did you know?" "Boy, I lived alone in these mountains for 15 years before I touched a woman. 15 years watching other men stumble out of saloons with girls giggling on their arms, while I went home to an empty cabin and a promise to a dead woman. You think I don't recognize that look, that starving look a man gets when he wants something so bad it's eating him from the inside?" The wind rattled the shutters. A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny souls ascending. James set down his cup on the rough table. His hand left a ring of condensation on wood worn smooth by 40 years of meals and conversations and the simple act of living. "She's taking vows to God. Who am I to stop her? What right do I have to ask her to choose me over her calling?" Ethan leaned back. The chair creaked. It always creaked in the same spot of familiar complaint. 40 years of memories pressed against his ribs like stones in a cairn. Heavy, permanent. The kind of weight you carry because putting it down would mean forgetting, and forgetting would mean they died for nothing. Let me tell you about December 1886, coldest winter in 20 years. They called it the Great Die-Up later when half the cattle in Wyoming froze where they stood and ranchers went broke counting frozen carcasses. I was 32 years old, still a virgin, still keeping my promise to my mother who'd been dead 15 years. Then one night, middle of the worst blizzard, I ever saw, someone pounded on my door. James sat down on the bed, the same bed where Sarah had been born 30 years ago, where Catherine had died 6 months back, the bed that had seen beginnings and endings and everything between. Outside, an elk bugled somewhere in the darkness, mating call or warning cry. Hard to tell sometimes. I opened that door expecting a drunk cowboy needing shelter or a wounded animal driven down by the storm. Instead, I found a woman collapsed in 5 feet of snow. She was wearing a black habit frozen solid as iron, hair that caught lamplight like diamonds, crucifix around her neck catching the glow like an accusation. A nun half dead on my doorstep, and me standing there with every promise I'd ever made about to shatter like ice under a boot heel. Sister Grace. Sister Grace Morrison, 40 years old, 18 years in the convent, 18 years hiding behind vows she'd made to escape grief, same way I'd hidden behind mine to escape being my father's son. Ethan picked up the whiskey, held it to the light. Amber liquid glowed like captured fire, like hope in a bottle. She broke her vows. I broke mine. Whole town called us sinners. Church called us damned. We called ourselves free. He drank. The whiskey burned, going down familiar and harsh. Set down the cup, looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen men die and children born and love bloom in impossible places. Eyes that had watched Catherine take her last breath and wished they could close and never open again. Had 28 years together before she died last spring. 3 children who lived, 2 who didn't. Life that was hard and beautiful and real. The kind of real that makes you bleed and laugh and wake up grateful even when your back hurts and your hands shake and you know there's more days behind than ahead. He drank again, set down the cup, the fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. Keeping that promise didn't define me, boy. Breaking it did. James stared at him. The fire reflected in his eyes. Young eyes. Eyes that hadn't seen what war would show them, what love would show them, what life would take and give back in measures that never quite balanced. You want to know if you should stop Sarah from taking those vows. Want to know if loving her makes you selfish or brave. I'll tell you the whole story. Then you decide. Because the choosing, that's all we get in this life. The consequences, those come whether we want them or not. Ethan poured more whiskey, settled into his chair, closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of winter wind and old grief and hard-won wisdom, earned in blood and tears and frozen dawns. This goes back to 1871. I was 17. The world was different then. Or maybe I was different. Hard to say which changes, more the world or the person living in it. December 20th, 1886. Eagle River watershed, 29 years earlier. Snow fell in thick curtains, turning the world into something unrecognizable. White on white, sky the same color as ground. The kind of weather that made a man question if he was walking forward or in circles, or if there was any difference when everywhere looked like nowhere. Ethan Sullivan crouched beside his trap line, checking the last set before the big storm hit. The steel jaws held nothing but frozen pine needles and disappointment. Story of his life lately, setting traps for prey that had better sense than to step in. 32 years old, 6 feet of lean muscle and scar tissue, hands that could snap a rabbit's neck clean or play a fiddle, though he hadn't touched a fiddle since his mother died. Hadn't wanted to make music when the only person who'd ever asked him to play was underground. Beard grown wild because there was nobody to trim it for, nobody to care what he looked like, nobody to see him except ravens and the occasional lost prospector. The trap was empty. 5 days checking 250 traps scattered across 40 miles of mountain territory, and he had caught exactly 12 beaver, 4 marten, and a fox with a torn pelt worth maybe 50 cents at the trading post. Winter was coming hard and his bank account was a joke. $47 saved from 2 years of trapping. $47 between him and starving. He reset the trap. His breath froze in the air like ghost words. The words he never said. The conversations he never had. All that silence freezing solid and falling to the ground to be buried under snow. The temperature was dropping fast, maybe 10 degrees in the last hour. His hands ached despite the wool gloves, fingers going numb. He flexed them, felt the joints protest. This high up 9,200 feet above sea level winter didn't come gentle. It arrived like judgment, sudden and absolute. By morning there'd be 4 feet of new snow and wind that could strip flesh from bone. The kind of cold that killed cattle where they stood and froze men solid in their saddles. The kind of cold that made you understand your place in the world, which was small and temporary and forgotten the moment you stopped moving. Ethan stood, his knees popped. 32 felt like 60 some days. Felt like he'd lived 3 lifetimes already, and none of them worth remembering. He looked north toward his cabin, 1.5 miles through drifts already waist deep. Firewood stacked against the south wall, 8 cords of split pine and aspen that had taken him 2 months to cut and haul. Beans and flour and salt pork stored in the root cellar. 200 pounds of dried venison hanging from the rafters wrapped in cheesecloth to keep the mice out. Enough to survive until March if he was careful. If the cabin didn't burn down. If he didn't break a leg and freeze before someone found him in spring. Enough to survive alone. Always alone. He started walking. Behind him, the trap waited for something that might never come. Same as him. Same as every trap he'd ever set, including the one he'd built for himself when he came to these mountains 9 years ago. A trap baited with isolation and solitude, and the promise that if he stayed away from people, he couldn't disappoint them. Couldn't become his father. That's what his whole life felt like sometimes. A trap set for prey that had better sense than to step in. And him the only fool stupid enough to stand in his own snare. 15 years earlier, summer 1871, his mother died on a Tuesday. Typhoid fever that came fast and burned hotter than any forge. 4 days from first symptoms to last breath. Doc Harrison did what he could, which was nothing. Medicine in 1871 mostly involved watching people die and pretending you'd tried, charging families for the privilege of helplessness. Ethan was 17, old enough to understand death, but young enough to think promises could stop it. Young enough to believe words had power and vows meant something more than sounds you made when grief stripped away everything else. Mary Sullivan lay in the bed she'd shared with Ethan's father before that bastard ran off with a saloon girl from Denver. Ran off and never looked back, never sent money, never wrote a letter. Just disappeared like smoke and left Mary to raise their son alone. 10 years she'd done it, working as a seamstress, fingers bleeding onto fabric so her son could eat. 10 years of sacrifice that ended with fever and delirium and a son kneeling beside her bed holding her cold hand and begging God for a miracle that never came. Don't be like your father. Her voice was barely a whisper. Ethan leaned close, smelled sickness and death in the lavender water she'd always worn. The smell he'd associate with her forever. The smell that would make him cry 40 years later when he'd catch it on some passing woman's clothes. Don't waste yourself on women who don't matter. Your father chose whiskey and loose women over his family. He died in a bar fight over some painted lady whose name he probably didn't remember. Died with a knife in his gut over nothing. Don't be Sean Sullivan. Wait for a woman who makes you want to be better, not less. Wait for one who's worth the waiting. Ma, please save your strength. Doc says you need to rest. Doc's a fool. She coughed. Blood flecked her lips. Promise me, Ethan. Promise me you won't throw yourself away on the first pretty face that smiles at you. Promise me you'll wait for one who makes you want to build something instead of destroy it. Her fingers tightened on his, stronger than they should be, like death was squeezing through her grip, like she was trying to hold on to this last thing, this last promise, this last chance to save her son from becoming his father. Promise me. He was 17. She was dying. The only person who had ever loved him was asking him for the only thing she'd ever asked. What was he supposed to say? How do you tell a dying woman no? I promise, Ma. I promise I'll wait. I'll find someone worth it. I swear. She smiled. First smile in 4 days. Good boy. Good boy, Ethan. You're going to be fine. You're going to be better than him. Better than me. You're going to build something that lasts. She closed her eyes. 6 hours later, she was gone. They buried her on Thursday. Ethan was alone by Friday, 17 years old with $47 to his name and a promise that would define the next 15 years of his life. Ethan kept that promise for 15 years. 15 years of watching other men stumble drunk from the Lucky Strike saloon with girl giggling on their arms. 15 years of lying awake in whatever bunk room or boarding house he could afford, listening to headboards bang against walls and wondering what he was missing. Wondering if honor was just another word for coward. Wondering if his mother would be proud or just once that her son had turned loneliness into a religion. He worked ranches for 5 years after she died. Good money, hard work bunkhouse full of men who made crude jokes about the virgin cowboy who wouldn't visit the cat house on payday. They thought it was funny, called him Saint Ethan, called him Mary, called him worse things when they were drunk enough. He took it because what else could he do? Break his promise over pride, but it wore on him. Ground him down like water on stone. By 1870, he couldn't take it anymore. The jokes, the questions, the looks, the constant reminder that he was different in a way that made him less. So he came to the mountains, became a trapper, built a cabin 12 feet by 16 feet at 9,200 feet elevation, so high and remote that temptation couldn't reach him, so isolated that he could go weeks without seeing another human face. Spent his days setting traps and his nights alone with ghosts. His mother's ghost, his father's ghost. The ghost of the man he might have been if he'd made different choices. The mountain men who worked the high country called him the waiting man, said it with respect mostly. Some meant it as mockery. Didn't matter. The name stuck. Stuck like everything else. Like the cold. Like the loneliness. Like the promise he'd made to a dead woman and couldn't break even when keeping it was killing him inch by inch. He went down to Silverton twice a year to sell furs. May and September, when the trails were passable and the merchants were buying. 2 days in town, then back to the mountains before someone offered him something he might be stupid enough to take. Before some girl smiled at him and he forgot why he was waiting in the first place. Fall 1884. Silverton. 2 years before the Nun. Ethan sold his furs for $320. Good season. The beaver had been plentiful, the pelts thick and glossy. The merchants paid cash, counted it out in his hand like they were doing him a favor. He bought supplies with most of it. Flour beans, coffee, ammunition for his Winchester, salt, sugar, needles and thread, tobacco for his pipe, all the things a man needed to survive alone in country that didn't care if he lived or died. He should have left town that afternoon, should have loaded his mule and ridden back up the mountain to his cabin and his solitude and the promise that kept him company on cold nights. Instead, he walked into the Lucky Strike saloon for one drink. Just one, to celebrate a good season, to taste whiskey and hear voices that weren't his own echoing in an empty cabin. One drink became six. The whiskey burned away 15 years of loneliness and replaced it with something dangerous. Something hungry, something that had been locked away so long it came out snarling. There was a girl working the room. They called her Lily, maybe 25 years old, maybe older. Hard to tell with the paint and the dim light. Red dress cut low enough to make promises. Smile that said she'd made those promises before and knew how to keep them. She sat next to him at the bar. Her perfume smelled like roses and desperation and every mistake he'd ever wanted to make. You're the one they call the waiting man. Her voice was softer than he expected, almost kind, like maybe she understood what it was to be alone in a room full of people. That's what they say. What are you waiting for, honey? He looked at her, really looked, saw the paint covering bruises on her cheek, dark purple under the powder, saw the tiredness in her eyes that had seen too much and stopped being sharpest, and saw a woman doing what she had to do to survive in a world that didn't offer many choices to women who'd made the wrong ones first. I don't know anymore. She put her hand on his leg. Heat shot through him like electricity, like lightning finding ground. 15 years of nothing, and now this. Her hand, her smell, her eyes looking at him like he was a man instead of a joke, like he was someone worth touching, worth wanting. Room upstairs is $3. We can find out together what you've been waiting for. His hand moved to his pocket before his brain could stop it. $3. He had 60 left after buying supplies. $3 to find out what 15 years of waiting had been for. $3 to break the promise and become his father's son and finally stop being alone. He paid, counted out the coins into her palm. Her fingers closed around them. Warm fingers, living fingers. Not the cold hand of a dead woman holding him to a promise made in grief. He followed her up narrow stairs to a room that smelled like old smoke and broken promises and every sin that had ever been committed behind a closed door. She closed the door. The sound was final, permanent, like a cell door shutting, like a coffin lid closing. She started unbuttoning her dress. Ethan stood there frozen. This was it, the moment, the line between keeping the promise and breaking it, between honoring his mother and living his life, between being alone forever and being alone tonight and maybe not alone tomorrow. Lily let the dress fall. She was beautiful. Scars on her ribs from God knew what. Bruises in the shape of fingers on her arms. Body that had been used and used hard, but was still alive, still warm, still offering something that looked like connection, even if it was just commerce. First time, he nodded, couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. Every muscle in his body was screaming contradictions. Run, stay, touch her, don't touch her. Break the promise, keep the promise. Live, choose. It's okay, honey, I'll be gentle. Everyone's nervous their first time. She stepped close, put her hands on his chest, started unbuttoning his shirt. Her fingers were practiced, efficient. This was work to her, just work. And he was just another customer paying for something that couldn't be bought but could be rented for $3 in 15 minutes. That's when he heard it, his mother's voice clear as bells, clear as if she was standing in the room with him. Don't waste yourself on women who don't matter. Lily didn't matter, not to him, not beyond this room and this moment, and $3 changing hands and 15 minutes of forgetting before the remembering came back worse than before. She was a transaction, a mechanical act, a way to break the promise without meaning it, without it meaning anything. And maybe that was worse than staying alone. He grabbed her wrists, gently, stopped her hands before they could undo another button. I can't. Where you can, honey, just relax. Let me take care of you. No, I mean, I can't do this. He pulled away, buttoned his shirt with shaking hands. His whole body was shaking, with want, with fear, with relief, with shame. I'm sorry, I thought I could. I can't. He pulled $20 from his pocket, more than a week's wages for most men, set it on the dresser next to the $3 he'd already given her. I'm sorry, he said again, for what he wasn't sure, for wasting her time, for being unable to do what every other man in town could do without thinking, for still being bound to a dead woman's words when living women were offering something real and warm and here. Lily stared at the money, then at him. Her face went from confused to angry to something like pity, maybe even respect. Hard to tell. You really are waiting, aren't you? Waiting for someone who don't exist, someone perfect, someone who'll make all this waiting worth it. Maybe. You're gonna die alone, honey. You know that. You're gonna die old and cold and alone, and nobody's gonna remember you waited. Nobody's gonna care you were pure. They're just gonna say you were scared. Maybe they'd be right. Yeah. She picked up the money, counted it. Maybe they would. He left, walked down the stairs and out of the saloon into cold September air that felt like absolution. Behind him, he heard Lily yelling, freak, virgin, freak, too scared to be a man. The other girls laughed. The men at the bar laughed. The piano player hit a wrong note that sounded like mockery. The whole damn town probably laughed. The waiting man who went upstairs with a whore and came back down still waiting. Ethan rode back to his cabin that night. Didn't stop. Didn't sleep. Rode through darkness until he was high enough that sound didn't carry and shame couldn't follow. High enough that the only thing that could hear him was God, and God had stopped listening a long time ago. He didn't go back to Silverton for a year. When he finally did, nobody mentioned it. But everybody knew. The looks told him, the whispers told him, the way men moved away from him like failure was contagious told him. The waiting man, the virgin trapper, the fool who couldn't do what nature intended because he'd promised a dead woman he'd wait for something that didn't exist. 2 years later, on a December night when the temperature dropped to 30 below and snow fell like God's own curtain, a different woman would knock on his door. And this time, he wouldn't walk away. But first, she had her own breaking to do. St. Benedict's Mission, 8 miles south of Silverton. December 20th, 1886. Sister Grace Morrison knelt in the chapel. Her knees ached against the hard wood. 40 years old, and her body reminded her constantly that youth was gone. Reminded her with every joint that popped, every muscle that protested, every morning that started with pain before the day had even begun. 18 years kneeling on these same boards, wearing the same black habit, saying the same prayers to a God who seemed increasingly distant, increasingly silent, increasingly like a story she'd told herself to avoid living a real story. Outside, wind screamed. The storm was coming. Everyone could feel it in their bones. The animals felt it. The orphans felt it. Even old Father Bernard felt it lying in his bed with legs that would never heal right after what Dutch Miller had done to him. She prayed anyway. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. The words were automatic. Muscle memory. Her mind was elsewhere. On the 14 orphans sleeping in the dormitory. Children who depended on her. Children who'd starve if the mission closed. On Father Bernard lying crippled in his bed legs, shattered by a fall that wasn't a fall. On Father Thomas dead 2 months now, body broken on stones below the bell tower. On the ultimatum that Silas Blackwood had delivered 3 hours ago. Sell the mission for $500, or she works at the Lucky Strike as a hostess. Prostitute in plain words. Pay off Father Bernard's supposed gambling debts with her body. Let Blackwood have her the way he'd had every other woman in this town who'd owed him money or favors, or just been unlucky enough to catch his eye. $1,200 Blackwood claimed they owed. Completely fabricated. Father Bernard had never gambled a day in his life. didn't even play cards with the children. But Blackwood had ledgers, witnesses' signatures. All fake. All convincing enough to fool a corrupt sheriff and a territorial judge whose clerk was on Blackwood's payroll. Deadline was Christmas Day, 5 days from now. 5 days to choose between her soul and the children's lives. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Her voice cracked. The crucifix on the wall stared down at her, Christ's agony frozen in brass and wood. She'd spent 18 years contemplating that suffering, 18 years trying to make sense of pain, trying to understand how a good God could allow bad things, how love and loss could coexist, how faith could survive when everything you believed in turned to ash. Nothing made sense anymore. Maybe it never had. She'd become a nun at 22. Not from calling, from grief. Her fiancé, Robert Hayes, had died in a mine collapse in 1868, 18 years ago now. 18 years, and she could still hear the sound of the rocks falling, still hear the screaming, still feel the way her hands bled when she dug trying to reach him. Dug until they'd pulled her away screaming. Dug until there was nothing left to dig for because Robert was already gone, had been gone for hours, had died in darkness calling her name while she'd been above ground in sunlight not knowing he was dying. Slow suffocation under tons of rock, while Catherine Morrison, not yet Sister Grace, dug with bare hands until they bled. Dug with 100 other people. Dug for 3 days straight. They had pulled his body out on the 4th day. By then she was hollow, scooped out. Nothing inside but echoes and guilt and grief so heavy it crushed her flat. 6 months later, she entered the convent, took the name Sister Grace, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, became a bride of Christ because being a widow to Robert was too painful, because the world outside hurt too much, because hiding behind walls and prayers and rituals felt safer than living in a place where people died for no reason, and love meant loss, and everything beautiful turned to rot. 18 years of hiding from life behind sacred promises. Now Blackwood wanted to drag her back into the world she'd fled, wanted to violate her body the way the mine had violated Robert's, wanted to prove that even God's protection was for sale if the price was right, that nothing was sacred, that vows were just words and walls were just stones, and a woman alone was just meat for the market. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. The hour of our death. Maybe that's what this was. Her death, not physical, spiritual. The death of Sister Grace so Catherine Morrison could live again, even if living meant damnation, even if freedom meant falling, even if the only way out was down. She stood, her knees popped. Habit rustled in the silence. The sound was loud. Everything was loud in silence. Breathing, heartbeat. The voice in her head that said she had options she hadn't considered. Options that involved choosing herself for once instead of choosing obligation. There was another option, one she'd been thinking about for days. One that made her stomach twist with shame and hope in equal measure. One that felt like the last desperate move of a woman with nothing left to lose. The waiting man, Ethan Sullivan. Mountain trapper who lived 18 miles north in country so remote even outlaws avoided it. She'd heard the trappers talk about him when they stopped at the mission for water on their way to and from the high country. Said he was honest, said he kept his word, said he'd made some kind of promise to his dead mother and had kept it for 15 years. 15 years alone in the mountains turning down offers that would have broken lesser men. Said he was the only man in Colorado who couldn't be bought. She'd never met him. But she'd heard enough to know one thing. If honor still existed in this territory, if there was still one man who valued his word more than his comfort, Ethan Sullivan was where that honor lived. She wasn't going to ask him to save her. She was going to ask him something harder. She was going to ask him to prove that honorable men still existed. Because if they didn't, if Blackwood represented the truth of the world, and Ethan Sullivan was just another myth, just another story people told themselves to feel better about the darkness, then there was no point in resisting. She might as well sell herself to Blackwood and at least save the children. At least let her damnation buy something worth having. But if Sullivan was real, if honor was real, if a man could keep a promise for 15 years just because he'd given his word, then maybe fighting was worth it. Maybe standing up to Blackwood had a chance. Maybe there was a way out that didn't involve choosing between her body and her soul. Grace walked to her small room, changed from her habit into riding clothes. Heavy wool skirt coat that had belonged to a dead prospector's wife, boots that were too big but serviceable. Left the habit folded on her bed like a shed skin, like something she might never put on again. The sight of it there empty and lifeless made her chest tight. In the stable, she saddled the mission's mare, Abigail, 15 years old, gentle as a lamb, reliable as sunrise. Not built for winter storms, but the best they had. The only horse they had, really. Everything else had been sold years ago to buy food for the children. Father Bernard was asleep in his room. She didn't wake him, couldn't bear to see his face. Couldn't bear to explain what she was doing or why. Couldn't bear the questions or the disappointment or the blessing he'd give her even though she didn't deserve it. She left a note instead, scrawled on paper in lamplight. Gone to find help, trust me. Grace. She rode out at 2 in the afternoon. The snow was already falling. Light at first, gentle, beautiful even. Like the world was being covered in grace, forgiven for all its sins under a blanket of white. By 3:30, the storm hit in earnest, and grace turned to judgment. Eagle River watershed, December 23rd, 1886. Early evening. The blizzard was biblical. The kind of storm old men would talk about for decades. The kind that changed the landscape, killed livestock by the thousands, and made people understand exactly how small they were in the face of nature's indifference. Wind screaming at 60 miles an hour. Snow falling so thick that Ethan couldn't see 10 feet. Visibility zero. Direction meaningless. Temperature plummeting from 35 degrees to 20 below in less than 4 hours. The kind of cold that killed cattle where they stood and froze men solid in their saddles. The kind of cold that turned moisture in your lungs to ice and made every breath a battle. Ethan was in his cabin, safe, prepared. Fire roaring in the hearth. Coffee on the stove, strong enough to wake the dead. Venison stew bubbling in a pot, filling the small space with the smell of meat and onions and the comfort of a full belly. He was prepared, had been through worse storms. This high-up blizzards were just another kind of silence, just another test to see if you were strong enough to survive. He sat in his chair, carving a piece of pine into something that might become a spoon if he didn't mess it up. The knife moved smooth, wood curled away in thin strips that fell to the floor like snow. Outside, the world tried to murder itself, and inside he made spoons nobody would ever use because making things kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering to places that hurt. This was his life. Survival and solitude. Making things for the sake of making them because the alternative was sitting still long enough to think about everything he wasn't, everything he'd never be, every choice he'd made that had led him here alone in a cabin at the edge of the world, carving spoons for ghosts. 9 o'clock. He banked the fire, laid out his bedroll on the floor. The bed was for guests. He'd never had a guest, probably never would. But the bed stayed made anyway, just in case what he couldn't say. Tomorrow he'd check the near traps if the storm let up. If it didn't, he had 4 days of food and a quart of firewood inside. Could wait it out. Had waited out worse. He was pulling off his boots when he heard it. Pounding, weak, barely audible over the wind. Could be nothing. Could be a branch hitting the wall. Could be his imagination creating company out of loneliness. The pounding came again. Definitely the door. Definitely human. Definitely desperate. He grabbed his rifle. Winchester loaded, always loaded. Could be a mountain lion driven down by the storm. Could be a deer gone mad with fear. Could be a man fleeing something worse than cold. In this country, you never knew. Better to have the rifle and not need it than need it and be dead. Ethan threw the bolt, opened the door a crack. Wind blasted snow into his face. Stinging, blinding, cold beyond cold. There was a woman collapsed in his doorway. She was covered in ice. Black fabric frozen solid as armor. Hair matted with snow turned to ice. Face blue lips, purple, eyes closed. Not moving. Maybe dead already. Maybe he was too late. Around her neck, a crucifix caught lamplight. Silver gleaming against frozen black. A nun. A nun had ridden into a blizzard and found his cabin and collapsed at his door like God's own test. Jesus Christ, she's a nun. He grabbed her under the arms, dragged her inside. She was light, too light, like the cold had hollowed her out. He kicked the door shut. The wind howled its protest, angry at being denied a victim. She was barely breathing. Core body temperature had to be around 90 degrees, maybe lower. She'd been outside for hours, miles in a blizzard, should be dead already. That she wasn't was a miracle or just stubborn biology refusing to quit. Ethan had seen hypothermia before, knew the stages, shivering, confusion, loss of coordination, then the shivering stopped. When it stopped, that meant the body had given up, had decided freezing to death was easier than fighting. She was past shivering. That was bad, very bad. Body giving up on warming itself, maybe an hour from death, maybe less, maybe already too far gone to save. He carried her to the bed, laid her down, started stripping off the frozen habit with shaking hands. Not from cold, from fear, from the weight of another life depending on whether he remembered what to do, whether he acted fast enough, whether he was good enough to save someone when he'd never been able to save his mother. First time touching a woman in 15 years, and she was unconscious and dying, and he was trying to save her life instead of take her virtue. The irony wasn't lost on him. His mother would have appreciated it, would have said something about God's sense of humor. The habit came off in pieces. Underneath, she wore a simple shift, wool soaked through, frozen in places. That came off too. He kept his eyes closed as much as possible, worked by feel, preserved her dignity even if she couldn't appreciate it, even if she was dying and dignity was the least of her concerns. Some things mattered. Some lines shouldn't be crossed, even when crossing them would be easier. When she was naked, he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, piled beaver furs on top. 40 pounds of furs he'd trapped and tanned himself, built the fire higher, put a kettle on for warm water. The cabin filled with heat and light and the smell of wet fur and the faint scent of lavender from her skin. Her fingers and toes were white and hard, frostbite, nose and ears too. He'd seen trappers lose digits to cold. Seen one lose his whole foot, had to cut it off himself when it went black. You had to warm the tissue slowly. Too fast caused shock, caused the heart to seize, killed them just as sure as freezing, but faster and more painful. He filled a bowl with water. Not hot, just warm. 95 degrees maybe. Tested it with his elbow like his mother had taught him when he was young, and she'd nurse him through fevers. Placed the nun's hands in it. Did the same with her feet. The water turned pink with blood. Circulation returning. Good. That was good. Meant the tissue might live. Might not turn black and fall off. She moaned. First sound she'd made. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Lost in fever dreams or hypothermia hallucinations. Seeing things that weren't there. Being somewhere else. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere before everything went wrong. Ethan made willow bark tea. Aspirin substitute. The bark was bitter but effective for pain and fever. Forced a few drops between her blue lips. Most of it ran down her chin, but some went in. Her throat worked. Swallowing. Another good sign. Body still fighting even if the mind had checked out. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2. He sat beside the bed monitoring her breathing, adding wood to the fire every 20 minutes, changing the water when it cooled, keeping it at that perfect temperature that encouraged healing without shocking the system. Watching for signs she might wake up or signs she might die. Sometimes they looked the same. At 3 in the morning, she grabbed his hand, her eyes opened, unfocused, fevered, pupils blown wide. She was delirious from hypothermia rebound, body trying to warm itself too fast, flooding the brain with confused signals, past and present mixing, reality and memory bleeding together. Robert. Her voice was a broken whisper, raw, like she'd been screaming. Maybe she had out there in the storm calling for help that never came. Robert, I'm sorry, I couldn't save you. The mine collapsed and I couldn't dig fast enough. I tried. God, I tried. Ethan froze. Who was Robert's husband? Brother, someone she'd loved and lost. Someone whose ghost still haunted her 18 years in a convent later. I tried. God, I tried. My hands bled, but I kept digging. 3 days. They said stop. Said he was already dead, but I kept digging. kept hoping, kept believing you might still be alive down there waiting for me. Tears ran down her face. She was somewhere else, somewhere 18 years ago, digging in darkness for a man who was already gone, digging for a ghost, digging for hope, digging because stopping meant accepting and accepting meant the pain was real. I lied, Robert. I said I became a nun for God, but it was cowardice. I was scared to love again, scared to lose again. Easier to be Sister Grace than Catherine who loved you, Catherine who failed you, Catherine who wasn't there when you died screaming my name. Catherine, her real name, the name she'd buried along with Robert, the name she'd hidden behind vows and habits and prayers to a God she wasn't sure existed anymore. Came to find the waiting man, heard he keeps promises to dead people, wanted to see if promises to the dead are worth more than life, wanted to know if honor is real or just another lie we tell ourselves to make the pain bearable. Her grip on his hand loosened. She slipped back into unconsciousness, fever breaking or getting worse. Hard to tell which. Ethan sat there in the firelight, holding the hand of a woman he didn't know, understanding more than he wanted to. Understanding everything, really. She hadn't become a nun from faith. She'd become one from fear. Same way he'd become a mountain man from fear. Same way they'd both been hiding for years from the thing they were most terrified of. Living, actually living instead of just surviving. Opening themselves up to dope, which meant opening themselves up to loss. Choosing connection, which meant choosing vulnerability. Being brave enough to let someone matter, which meant being brave enough to hurt when they were gone. He looked at her face, peaceful now that the fever dreams had passed. She was beautiful in a worn way. 40 years of life written in lines around her eyes, hair dark with streaks of gray, body that had worked hard and suffered and survived. Not the beauty of youth, the beauty of endurance, of still standing when everything said to fall down. She'd ridden miles into a blizzard to find him, not for rescue, for proof that keeping promises to the dead had meaning. That honor existed somewhere in a world run by men like Silas Blackwood, who bought and sold everything, including human souls. That somewhere, somehow, there was still one person who valued truth over comfort and promises over pleasure. She was testing him, testing whether the stories were true, whether the waiting man was real or just another myth, whether hope was justified or just another cruel joke. The question was whether he'd pass, whether he was strong enough to be what she needed him to be, whether 15 years of waiting had made him into something worthy or just made him a fool who'd wasted his life on a dead woman's words. Dawn came gray and cold. The storm had lessened to steady snowfall, wind down to 20 miles an hour, temperature still 30 below but not dropping anymore. The worst had passed, for now. Ethan had dozed in his chair, woke to the direct sound of the woman stirring, woke to the reality that there was another person in his cabin, another heartbeat, another voice, another life depending on him. Her eyes opened, clear this time, aware, present. She saw the cabin, saw him, looked down at herself wrapped in blankets and furs. Realization crossed her face. She'd been undressed. Someone had seen her naked. Someone had touched her when she was vulnerable and couldn't defend herself. Did you? She couldn't finish the question, couldn't say the word, just looked at him with eyes that had seen too much betrayal to trust easily. No. His voice came out rougher than intended. 40 hours without real sleep did that. You were dying. I warmed you up, eyes closed the whole time, just trying to save your life, not take advantage. She studied his face, looking for lies, for the subtle tells men made when they were hiding something. Found none. Something in her relaxed. Not trust exactly. But the beginning of it. You're Ethan Sullivan, the waiting man. That's what they call me. I'm Sister Grace Morrison. A pause. Or I was, not sure what I am anymore. Catherine. She went still, every muscle tensing. What? You said your name was Catherine last night when you were fevered, talked about someone named Robert, about a mind collapse, about becoming a nun from fear instead of faith. Her face flushed, red creeping up her neck, shame or anger or embarrassment. Maybe all three. I was delirious, saying things that weren't true. Fever does that. Fever makes you honest, makes you say things you hide when you're in control. You don't know me. I know you rode into a blizzard looking for proof. Know you came here to test whether I'm real or just another story, whether honor exists or if it's just a word men use to feel better about themselves. She looked away, couldn't hold his gaze. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, silence stretched like a wire pulled tight, like a rope about to snap. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. Silas Blackwood is forcing me to choose, work at his saloon as a prostitute or watch 14 orphans starve. I have 5 days to decide. I ran because I needed to know if there's still one man in Colorado who can't be bought. One man who keeps his word, even when it costs him everything. And if I'm not, then there's no point fighting. Might as well give Blackwood what he wants. At least save the children. At least let my damnation buy something worth having. Ethan stood, poured coffee into a tin cup, handed it to her. Their fingers touched. Electricity. Connection. The first intentional touch in between them, and it felt like lightning finding ground. Storm's still bad. Can't travel for at least a day. Maybe 2. You're stuck here with me. I know. 12 feet by 16 feet. 1 room, 1 bed, nowhere to hide. I know. I've kept a promise to my dead mother for 15 years. Promised I wouldn't touch a woman until I found one worth keeping. You're a nun. Got your own promises to a dead man and a living God. We're both bound by words we said to people who can't release us. He looked at her, really looked. Saw courage and fear and desperation and hope all tangled together like roots of a tree growing in rocky soil. Saw someone who'd chosen to ride into a storm instead of surrender. Saw bravery masquerading as desperation. Saw everything he'd been too scared to be. This is going to be hard. She held his gaze. Didn't look away. Didn't flinch. Just accepted the truth of it. Everything worth doing is. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, 2 people who'd spent years hiding from life found themselves trapped in 12 feet by 16 feet with nowhere to run and nothing to do but face what they'd been avoiding. The cabin was warm. The fire crackled. They sat in silence, drinking coffee, not looking at each other directly, but always aware. Aware of breathing, aware of heartbeat, aware of the dangerous thing growing in the space between them. The thing that felt like hope and terror and possibility all mixed together. This was December 24th, 1886, Christmas Eve. Neither of them knew it yet, but by tomorrow night, every promise they'd ever made would be broken, and neither of them would regret it. December 25th, 1886, Christmas morning, dawn. Ethan woke to silence. The particular silence that comes after storms when the world holds its breath and waits to see what damage has been done. What's been lost? What's survived? He'd slept in his chair again. Winchester across his lap, loaded and ready. Fire burned down to coals that glowed like dying stars. His neck ached. His back complained. 32 years of sleeping in chairs all night because a woman occupied his bed, and some part of him, some stubborn, foolish part, still believed in propriety even when propriety had abandoned him years ago. A woman who wasn't his wife, wasn't anything to him except a stranger who tested his honor and found it lacking in ways neither of them had expected. Found it complicated. Found it human. Catherine was still sleeping, her breathing steady and deep, color back in her face, the death pallor replaced by something alive. The frostbite on her fingers and toes had stopped spreading, pink instead of white. She'd live, probably keep all her digits if they were careful, if infection didn't set in, if fever didn't take her the way it had taken his mother. He stood quietly, joints popping like dry kindling. Stretched, felt vertebrae realign with small cracks of relief. Walked to the window and cracked the shutter just enough to peer out without letting in the cold. 5.5 feet of new snow. Drifts 8 to 10 feet where the wind had sculpted them into frozen waves. The sky was lighter, gray instead of black. Snow still falling, but gentle now. Soft, almost apologetic. The blizzard's fury had passed. Now came the quiet aftermath, the assessment of damage, the long dig out. But travel was impossible. Would be for days. They were trapped here together in this tiny space with nothing but honesty and desire and the promises they'd made to people who couldn't release them. trapped with their own histories and hopes and the dawning realization that sometimes the thing you've been running from is the only thing worth running toward. He built up the fire, put coffee on to boil, started making pancakes from flour and melted snow and lard. Simple food, survival food, nothing special. But it was Christmas morning and his mother had always made pancakes on Christmas. One tradition he'd kept even when everything else had fallen away. One way of remembering that some things mattered even when you were alone. Behind him, Catherine stirred. Morning, her voice was rough from sleep and hypothermia and breathing cold air for hours. He didn't turn around, kept his eyes on the griddle, kept his hands busy. Easier than looking at her and remembering how she looked wrapped in furs, how her skin had felt under his hands when he'd checked her pulse, how she'd smelled like lavender, even half frozen. Storms let up some, still can't travel, maybe another day, maybe two. I figured. He heard her sitting up, heard the rustle of blankets, tried very hard not to imagine what she looked like in him when wearing his spare shirt and nothing else. Tried and failed. 15 years of celibacy had not prepared him for this kind of torture, for wanting something he couldn't have, for being this close to breaking a promise he'd kept through sheer stubborn will. He flipped the pancakes. They were terrible. Too much lard, not enough salt. Edges burned, centers still raw. He'd forgotten how to cook for anyone but himself, and himself didn't care much about flavor, about making things good instead of just edible. Food's ready. She came to the table. He finally looked at her, regretted it immediately. She'd put on the wool pants he'd left folded on the chair. His shirt hung loose on her frame collar open, showing the hollow of her throat. Her hair was down uncombed, streaked with gray and black like a badger's pelt. No makeup, no artifice. Just a woman who'd survived a blizzard and was trying to survive the morning after. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Not the beauty of youth, the beauty of survival, of having lived hard and still standing, of scars earned and worn with dignity. They ate in silence. The pancakes were terrible, but she ate every bite, drank her coffee black, stared at the rough wood table like it held secrets, like she could divine the future in the grain. Finally, she spoke. I'm sorry about last night. Nothing to be sorry for. I put you in an impossible position. You're honoring your promise. I should honor mine. Should go back. Should accept what's coming. Should stop running. Your promise was made under duress. Mine was freely given. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of creek water in shadow. Gray and brown and green all mixed together. Old eyes, tired eyes, eyes that had cried too many tears and stopped expecting relief. Robert was dying when I promised to love only God. Is that not duress? Is any promise made in grief truly free? He had no answer for that. No wisdom, no comfort. Just silence and the sound of wind outside and the fire crackling and his own heartbeat too loud in his ears. The silence stretched. Outside a raven called, the harsh call cutting through the morning like a knife. Inside the fire crackled, and two people who'd been strangers 48 hours ago sat across a table that was barely 2 feet wide and felt like miles. Miles and miles of distance that couldn't be crossed without consequences neither of them could predict. 10 o'clock. Ethan was cleaning dishes when he heard it. The sound every isolated man dreads. Horses, multiple riders, coming from the south through deep snow, coming with purpose. He grabbed his Winchester, moved to the window, cracked the shutter just enough to see out without being seen. 7 horses, no 8, coming up the trail toward his cabin, moving slow through the deep snow but coming steady, determined, not turning back. He recognized the lead rider immediately. Sheriff William Briggs, Silverton's Law, bought and paid for by Silas Blackwood. $40 a month to look the other way, to close investigations before they started, to arrest the people Blackwood wanted arrested and free the people Blackwood wanted free. Behind him, 2 deputies Ethan didn't know by name. Young men, stupid men. The kind who thought wearing a badge made them brave instead of just making them targets. Catherine, she heard the tone in his voice. The urgency, the fear, stood immediately, cup still in hand. Who is it? Sheriff. Get in the root cellar, now. Where? He kicked aside the bearskin rug underneath a trap door, 4 feet by 6 feet, old wood weathered gray. He pulled it open. Darkness below, the smell of earth and potatoes and cold storage. Down, quiet. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear, no matter what he says, no matter what happens. She looked at the hole, at him. Understanding crossed her face like a shadow. If the sheriff found her here with him, everything would be over before it started. Her reputation destroyed, his credibility gone. Blackwood would win without lifting a finger. She climbed down the ladder, 6 feet to the cellar floor. The space was maybe 6 feet by 5 feet tall. Cold, dark, smelled like earth and root vegetables in the accumulated dampness of 3 winters. Storage for potatoes and carrots and onions. A place to keep things fresh through the winter. A place to hide evidence. A place to preserve what mattered. Ethan closed the trap door, kicked the rug back over it, sat on top of it in his chair, positioned the rifle across his knees. Casual. Not threatening. Just a man alone in his cabin on Christmas morning. The pounding on his door came 30 seconds later. Hard. Official. The kind of knock that said, "Open up or we're coming in anyway." He waited. Let them knock 3 times. Let them wonder if he was home. Let them get cold and impatient. Then he stood Winchester in hand but pointed down and opened the door 6 inches. Just enough to talk. Not enough to invite entry. Sheriff. William Briggs was 50 years old and looked older. Hard living and harder choices had worn him down to nothing but meanness and compromise. Worn him down to a man who'd sold his soul in installments so small he probably didn't notice until there was nothing left to sell. He had a deputy on each side, both young, both eager, both stupid enough to think wearing a badge made them brave instead of just making them complicit. Ethan, checking on folks during the storm. You all right? Fine, storm's letting up. Good, good. Briggs looked past him trying to see into the cabin, eyes searching for evidence, for proof, for anything he could use. You alone up here? Who else would be here? I'm 18 miles from town. Nobody comes up here by choice. None went missing from St. Benedict's mission 3 days ago. Sister Grace Morrison. Mr. Blackwood's worried about her safety. The way Briggs said safety made it clear what Blackwood really wanted. Made it clear that concern was a mask for ownership, for control, for the belief that everything in Silverton, including the nuns, belonged to him by right of money and power. Nobody out here but me and the Raven sheriff. That's so. Briggs stepped closer. Ethan didn't move from the doorway, didn't give an inch. Mind if we look around, just being thorough? Storm like this woman could have lost her way, could be hurt somewhere, could be in your cabin right now and you didn't hear her over the wind. Ethan didn't move from the doorway. His hand tightened on the rifle. Not threatening, just present. Just a reminder that this was his property and he had rights even if Briggs worked for a man who thought rights were negotiable. Need a warrant to search a man's home, Sheriff. Even in a blizzard, even on Christmas. Constitution doesn't stop at the tree line. Just being neighborly, just making sure everyone's safe. Appreciate your concern, but I'm fine. Day's wasting and you got a long ride back. Best get started before another storm hits. Briggs's eyes narrowed. He was calculating, weighing whether pushing this was worth the trouble. Ethan was known to be handy with that rifle, known to be private, known to have shot a claim jumper in 1879, and the judge ruled it self-defense. And even Blackwood's money might not be worth getting shot over a maybe, over a suspicion, over something that might not even be there. Mr. Blackwood don't like when people go missing on his watch. He's very protective of church property. The message was clear. Blackwood owned Sister Grace the way he owned the Lucky Strike Saloon and half the claims in the territory and the sheriff standing in front of Ethan right now. She was property that had wandered off. Property that needed to be returned to its owner so he could do with it what property was for. If I see her, I'll bring her to town. You do that. Deadline's noon today. After that, well, consequences happen. Bad consequences for everyone involved, especially people who help fugitives hide from their obligations. Briggs tipped his hat, turned his horse, rode back down the trail with his deputies following. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The threat had been delivered. The message clear. Ethan waited until they were out of sight, waited another 5 minutes, counted to 300. Then he opened the trap door. Catherine climbed out. She was shaking. Not from cold. The root cellar wasn't that cold. From rage. From hearing herself called property. From understanding exactly how little she mattered to men like Blackwood and Briggs. How little any woman mattered when money was involved. He called me church property. Like I'm a horse. Like I'm something to be owned and used and put back in the stable when he's done. Blackwood thinks he owns everything, including people, especially people who can't fight back. I heard it all. Every word. She looked at him. Really looked. Saw him as something other than a test. Saw him as a person. As someone who just risked everything to hide her, to protect her, to choose her over safety. He'll come here if I don't return by noon. Let him come. You'll die defending a woman you barely know. Maybe, or maybe I'll live defending something that matters for once in my miserable life. Better than living as a coward. Better than being safe and ashamed. She stared at him. Something shifted in her eyes, not gratitude. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. Seeing in him the same thing he'd seen in her during her fever dreams. Someone who'd rather die honest than live on their knees. Someone who'd spent years running from life and was tired of running. Someone who was ready to stand even if standing meant falling. Tell me about Blackwood, he said. All of it, everything you know. They sat by the fire. Catherine told him everything, and it was worse than he'd imagined. Silas Blackwood was 52 years old and worth $500,000. $500,000. More money than everyone in Silverton combined would make in their lifetimes. He owned 4 silver mines, 1 copper mine, and the ore processing mill. Employed 200 men at $2 a day, half of which went back to him through the company store where prices were triple what they should be. Where refusing to shop meant losing your job. Where debt was inevitable and designed. He'd built his empire on claim jumping and murder. Killed at least 3 claim owners between 1878 and 1883. Shot one in the back, pushed another off a cliff and called it an accident. Had the third beaten to death by hired thugs and bought the sheriff's silence for $20. Never prosecuted, never even investigated properly. Just buried and forgotten like they'd never existed. The sheriff was on his payroll at $100 a month, more than most men made in 3. The judge's clerk was blackmailed over gambling debts that Blackwood had engineered. Loaned him money, got him drunk, cheated him at cards, then owned him. 2 of 5 town council members took his money. The mayor owed him favors. The newspaper editor had been bought years ago. The Lucky Strike Saloon was a front for prostitution. 8 women working as hostesses, 50% of their earnings going to Blackwood. More if they wanted protection from the customers who got rough. Opium den in the basement. Loan sharking at 50% interest monthly compounded. Men who didn't pay got broken bones. Men who still didn't pay disappeared. Bodies found in spring thaw with no questions asked. Ethan listened, didn't interrupt. Let her words paint a picture of corruption so deep it had roots in every part of Silverton's government. So deep that pulling out one piece would make the whole structure collapse. Or should. In a just world, it should. And there's something else, Catherine said, her voice dropping, getting quieter, like saying it too loud would make it more real. Blackwood's son Michael died last September. 16 years old, infected leg wound, started as a cut from barbed wire, turned septic. Blackwood demanded Father Bernard pray for a miracle, demanded God save his boy. When Father Bernard said he couldn't promise miracles, that he could only pray and hope, and that God's will would be done, Blackwood went mad. Said if God wouldn't save his son, then the church was worthless. Then Father Bernard was worthless. She paused, took a breath. The memory was heavy, the weight of it visible in her shoulders. Michael died 3 days later, died screaming, died in agony, and Blackwood blamed Father Bernard, blamed God, blamed the church. Said if he couldn't have his son, then Father Bernard didn't deserve to live, that the church didn't deserve to exist. That was when he found out about the silver under our land. Or maybe he'd known before and Michael's death just gave him an excuse. A reason beyond greed. A reason that felt like justice to him even though it was just revenge. Ethan stared into the fire, watched flames dance over split pine, thought about a world where murder could be bought for $500 and justified by grief, where a father's pain could become permission to destroy everything and everyone in his path, where love could rot into hate so completely that they became the same thing. Father Bernard didn't just fall from the bell tower, she said finally. Her voice went even quieter, almost a whisper, like she was confessing, like speaking it aloud made her complicit. I saw it happen. You were there. In the chapel below, it was Father Thomas, a visiting priest who had come to help Father Bernard with confessions and masses. November 1st, 3 in the afternoon. I was praying, heard footsteps above in the bell tower. Heavy boots, 2 men. I heard Father Thomas's voice. He said, "You can't do this. Silas will hang for murder." Then scuffling, then silence, then her hands were shaking. She clasped them together, knuckles white, trying to stop the shaking through force of will. Then his body fell past the window, fell and hit the stones below. The sound, I can still hear it. The sound of a body hitting stone. The sound of a man dying. The sound of evil winning. You ran outside? I did. Saw 2 men riding away, fast. I recognized the horses. One was Dutch Miller's gray gelding. The other was Henry Brennan's chestnut mare. They killed Father Thomas and rode away like it was nothing, like murder was just another chore, like a man's life meant less than a morning's work. You told the sheriff, she laughed, bitter and broken. The laugh of someone who'd learned that justice was just a word people used to feel better about injustice. Briggs investigated for 15 minutes, declared it accidental, said Father Thomas was old, probably dizzy, probably lost his balance, probably didn't watch his step, closed the case that afternoon, never even questioned Dutch or Henry, never looked for evidence, never asked me what I saw even though I was the only witness, just closed it. Like truth didn't matter, like justice was optional. Blackwood has him bought. Blackwood has everyone bought. She looked at him with eyes that had cried all their tears and moved on to something colder, something harder. Except you. That's why I came. You were the only man I could think of who might care more about what's right than what's profitable. The only man who might value his word more than his comfort. Ethan stared into the fire, watched flames dance over split pine, thought about a world where murder could be bought for $500 and a priest's life meant nothing and a sheriff's badge was just another commodity for sale. Thought about standing against that, about fighting it, about probably losing but trying anyway because the alternative was accepting it, becoming it, being complicit through silence. We expose him, he said, make him pay for Father Thomas, for threatening you, for all of it. How he owns the law. Then we go above the law, U.S. Marshal in Denver, federal jurisdiction for murder on church property. Murder of a priest, that's bigger than Silverton, bigger than Briggs, bigger than Blackwood's money, Bussy. Marshall won't come without proof, my word against Blackwood's. And my word doesn't count for much. I'm just a woman, just a nun who broke her vows and ran away, just property that wandered off. Then we get proof. We find Henry Brennan and make him talk, or Dutch Miller. Or we find evidence, something, anything. But we don't give up, don't surrender, don't let Blackwood win just because winning is hard. They spent the afternoon planning. Ethan sketched a rough map of Silverton on a piece of bark with charcoal from the fire, showed her what he remembered from his twice-yearly trips to Pony Firs, where the sheriff's office was, where Blackwood lived, where his men gathered, the geography of corruption. The problem was time. It was noon. The deadline had passed. Blackwood would act, whether that meant sending the men to the cabin or burning the mission or something worse they didn't know. But waiting wasn't an option. Waiting meant accepting, meant letting him win by default. And they couldn't ride to Denver, 120 miles through winter storms. 3 days minimum, probably 5 if the weather turned. By the time they got there and convinced the marshal and got back whatever Blackwood planned would be done. The mission burned, the children scattered, Catherine's reputation destroyed beyond repair. They needed allies, someone in Blackwood's organization who could be turned. Someone with a conscience buried under fear. Someone who might do the right thing if given the chance, if given protection, if given hope. Henry Brennan, Catherine said. He hesitated when Blackwood gave the ultimatum. Twice he started to speak, and twice Blackwood shut him down. Like he was afraid Henry might object, might disagree, might grow a spine. What do you know about Henry? Not much. He works for Blackwood. Has for 5 years. But the trappers who stop at the mission, they say he's not like the others. Dutch Miller is cruel, enjoys hurting people. Snake-Eye Pete is crazy, laughs when things die. But Henry just seems lost, like he fell in with bad people and doesn't know how to get out, like he's drowning and can't remember how to swim. Everyone's got a lever, Ethan said. His father had taught him that before he had run off. Only useful thing the bastard ever taught him. Something they care about more than money, more than fear. Find the lever, you can move them. Find what matters, and you find the way in. What's Henry's lever? Don't know yet, but we're going to find out. And when we do, we're going to push until something breaks. Him or Blackwood, one or the other. 2 o'clock. The temperature was dropping again. The sky had gone from gray to darker gray, clouds building in the west. Another storm was coming. Not as bad as the last one, but bad enough. Bad enough to trap them here longer. Bad enough to give Blackwood more time to plan, more time to position his pieces. And then they heard it. The sound that changed everything. Horses, many horses, coming fast despite the deep snow, coming with purpose. Ethan grabbed his rifle, moved to the window, cracked the shutter. 7 riders, Silas Blackwood in front on a black stallion that cost more than Ethan's cabin. Dutch Miller beside him on that gray gelding. Henry Brennan on his chestnut mare. 3 men Ethan didn't recognize. Hard men, gunmen, killers for hire. And in a wagon behind them pulled by 2 horses, Father Bernard. The old priest was visible in the wagon bed, crippled legs wrapped in blankets. Broken but alive. Barely. Blackwood had brought the priest as a weapon. Emotional leverage. A hostage. A reminder of what happened to people who opposed him. A promise of what would happen to Catherine if she didn't comply. The riders stopped 50 yards out, just beyond rifle range. 300 yards. Smart. They'd done this before. Knew how to position themselves. How to use distance as armor. Blackwood dismounted. He was a big man, not fat, solid, like something carved from granite and given a suit. His face was hard angles and no mercy. Eyes like chips of ice. Mouth set in a line that had forgotten how to smile except when causing pain. Sister Grace, his voice carried across the snow. Strong, confident. The voice of a man who'd never lost, never been denied, never heard the word no and accepted of it. I know you're in there. Father Bernard wants to talk to you. Inside the cabin, Catherine's face went white, every drop of color draining away. She looked like a corpse, like a ghost, like someone already dead just waiting for the body to catch up. Grace, please. Father Bernard's voice was weak, broken, 68 years old and sounded 90. The children, they need you. Come home. Don't make this harder. Don't make them suffer for your pride. Ethan looked at Catherine, saw her resolve cracking, saw the weight of responsibility crushing her. 14 orphans, children who depended on her, children who'd starve if the mission had closed, children who had no one else, nothing else, nowhere else to go. It's a trap, he said quietly, putting his hand on her shoulder, feeling her shake under his palm. He brought Father Bernard to break you, to make you feel guilty, to make you surrender. Don't let him. But he's right. If I don't go back, they'll suffer. The children, they didn't ask for this, didn't do anything wrong. Why should they pay for my choices? They won't. We'll figure something out. But if you go back now, Blackwood wins everything. Gets the land, gets you, gets to prove that threats work, that violence works, that enough pressure breaks anyone. Blackwood shouted again, getting impatient, getting angry. Noon deadline passed, sister. Terms have changed. Work for me 2 years instead of 1. Debt's clear. Orphans stay fed. Everyone wins except you, but you're just one person. One life. Is your virtue worth more than 14 children's lives? Dutch Miller pulled out a torch, pulled out a match, struck it, lit the torch. Flames flickered in the gray afternoon light, orange and yellow and red, beautiful and terrible. Or I burn the mission tonight with Father Bernard inside. Your choice, sister. Your precious virtue or an old man's life. A building full of children or 2 years on your back. You have 1 minute to decide. Ethan raised his rifle, sighted on Blackwood's chest, 300 yards. Long shot, difficult, but he could make it. One bullet, end this. Kill the head and maybe the body dies. Maybe, but 6 other men would open fire. Catherine would die. He'd die. And Father Bernard would still burn. The orphans would still starve. And Blackwood's empire would continue under new management. Nothing would change except 2 more graves in the spring. I'll kill you, Blackwood, Ethan shouted, letting rage carry his voice, letting Blackwood hear the threat and know it was real. Touch her and I'll hunt you to hell and back. Try it, mountain man. You might get 1 shot. Maybe you even hit me. But my 6 men will cut you down before you can reload. Then we take Sister Grace anyway and burn your cabin for good measure. Your choice, death or cooperation. What's it gonna be? Henry Brennan shifted in his saddle. Ethan saw it. Small movement, uncomfortable, uncertain, maybe doubt, maybe conscience, maybe the lever he needed. Boss, maybe we should, Henry started. Shut up, Henry. Blackwood didn't even look at him, didn't give him the courtesy of eye contact. Unless you want your secret about Denver told, unless you want everyone to know what kind of man you really are, what kind of father you've been. Henry went quiet, but his face showed something. Fear, shame, pain, the lever. Whatever Blackwood knew about Henry and Denver, whatever secret about fatherhood he was holding over Henry's head, that was the thing that kept him loyal. That was the chain. Mental note, Blackwood was blackmailing Henry. That meant Henry might earn on if offered something better than fear. Protection instead of threats. Hope instead of despair. Truth instead of lies. Grace stays here, Ethan said, making his choice, drawing his line. You want her, come get her. Come up this hill and try to take her. See what happens. Blackwood smiled. Not a happy smile. Not even an angry smile. A predator's smile. The smile of something that knows it's bigger and stronger and that the prey has nowhere to run. Fine, we wait. Can't stay in that cabin forever. No food, no wood. You'll freeze or starve in 3 days. Maybe 4 if you're tough. Or you walk out to piss and Dutch puts a bullet in your back. Or you both walk out begging and we take her anyway. Time's on my side, mountain man. Always has been. Always will be. He turned to his men. God camp. 2 men on watch at all times. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out. We wait them out. Patience wins wars. Patience and money and knowing that eventually everyone breaks. They built a fire 100 yards away. Pitched canvas tents. Dutch and one of the hired guns took first watch. The others settled in like they were on a pleasant hunting trip instead of a siege. Like waiting for people to starve was just another day's work. Father Bernard called out one more time. Voice breaking. Tears in it. Grace, I'm sorry. I tried to protect the mission. Tried to stand up to him. Failed. This is my fault. My failure. Don't suffer for my weakness. Catherine moved to the window. Ethan grabbed her arm. Gentle but firm. Don't give him the satisfaction. Don't let him see you break. He needs to know I'm all right, that I haven't abandoned him. He needs to know you're fighting, that's all. That you're still standing, still choosing resistance over surrender. That's what gives him hope, not seeing you, not words. Action. She pulled free, opened the shutter slightly. Just a crack. Father, it's not your fault. Rest, save your strength. I'm fine, we're going to fix this, her voice carried. Strong, stronger than she felt. Father Bernard nodded, seemed to relax slightly, seemed to accept that she was alive, that she was okay, that maybe there was still hope. The shutter closed. Catherine leaned against the wall. Tears ran down her face. Silent, she didn't make a sound. Just cried without sound. The kind of crying that comes from deep places, from grief too heavy for noise. We're trapped. We're alive, that's something. For how long? 4 days, 5, then what? We starve or surrender or try to fight and die anyway. Ethan did the math in his head. Food stores, firewood, water. Time before they had no choice but to surrender or die. 4 days, maybe 5 if we're careful, if we ration everything, if we get lucky. And then we find a way, or we die trying. Those are the only two options that matter. Night fell. Outside Blackwood's men rotated watches, kept the fire burning, made camp like they were on a pleasant hunting trip instead of a siege. Dutch told stories, laughed. The sound carried, cruel laughter. The laughter of men who enjoyed suffering, who found joy in others' pain. Inside, Ethan and Catherine sat by their own fire, eating beans and hardtack, drinking coffee, not talking much. What was there to say they were trapped, outgunned, running out of time and options? Every path forward led to suffering. The only question was who's suffering and how much. Catherine set down her tin cup. The sound was loud in the silence. I have to surrender. No. You'll die here because of me. You'll die for nothing, for someone you don't even know, for a woman who made bad choices and dragged you into consequences that aren't yours. I'd rather die free than live knowing I gave you to that monster. Rather die standing than live on my knees. This isn't your fight. He looked at her, really looked, saw courage and fear and strength all mixed together in a woman who'd ridden into a blizzard rather than accept slavery. Saw someone worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth breaking every promise he'd ever made for. It became my fight the moment you knocked on my door, the moment I opened it and saw you there frozen and desperate and braver than anyone I'd ever met. I've spent 15 years hiding from life, Catherine. Hiding up here in the mountains where nothing could touch me, where I didn't have to feel anything or want anything or risk anything, where being safe was the same as being dead, and I didn't know the difference. He leaned forward, held her gaze, made sure she heard him, really heard him. I'm done hiding, done being safe, done keeping promises to dead people while ignoring living ones who need me. You need me. And for the first time in 15 years, I feel like I matter. Like what I do matters. Like I'm alive for a reason. Don't take that away from me. Don't rob me of the chance to be someone worth being. I'm not worth dying for. I'm just a broken woman who ran from grief 18 years ago and never stopped running. You're the bravest woman I've ever met. You rode 12 miles in a blizzard to escape slavery. That's not running from. That's running toward hope, toward help, toward the possibility that maybe someone in this world still gives a damn about honor. She was crying now, silent tears that reflected firelight, that ran down her face and dripped onto the table between them. If we're going to die tomorrow, I don't want to die having never lived. Don't want to die a virgin bride of Christ who never knew what it meant to be wanted by a man, chosen by a man, loved by someone who saw all my flaws and chose me anyway. The words hung in the air between them, an invitation, a question, a line about to be crossed. Catherine, I know what I'm asking. I know what it means. She took his hand. Her hand was small in his, calloused from work but still soft in places, still feminine despite the years. But I'm asking anyway, because tomorrow we might die. And I don't want my last regret to be that I was too scared to live when I had the chance. You'll be excommunicated, cut off from the church, from God, from everything you have known for 18 years. I've been spiritually dead for 18 years. Excommunication is just paperwork, just making official what's already true. I'll break my promise, the only promise that ever mattered to me, the only thing that made me different from my father. Then break it for the right reason. Break it because you choose life over death, because you choose connection over isolation, because you choose love over loneliness, because promises to dead people matter less than promises to yourself, to the person you want to be. He looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life during a blizzard and turned everything upside down. This woman who made him want to be braver, better, more, who made him want to live instead of just survive, who made him feel like maybe 15 years of waiting had been for something, for her, for this moment, for the choice between keeping a promise and keeping his humanity. His mother's words came back. Wait for a woman who makes you want to be better, not less. Catherine made him want to be everything he'd been too scared to try. If we do this, there's no going back. Can't undo it. Can't pretend it didn't happen. Can't hide from the consequences. I don't want to go back. Don't want to hide. Just want to be Catherine for once instead of Sister Grace. Want to be a woman instead of a symbol. Want to be alive instead of preserved. He kissed her. She kissed back. 18 years of loneliness breaking like ice in spring thaw, like a dam giving way, like every wall ever built suddenly meaningless. They stumbled to the bed, hands shaking, both virgins despite being 32 and 40, both terrified, both wanting, both ready. What happened next was fumbling and awkward and tender and fierce, laughter mixed with tears, pleasure mixed with pain. Two broken people finding something whole in each other. Two people who'd spent years hiding from life, finally choosing to live, even if living meant damnation, even if heaven wasn't worth the price of earth. They fell asleep tangled together. The fire burned low. Outside, Blackwood's men kept watch. Inside, two souls found something neither had been looking for. Peace, connection. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they'd thought. 3 a.m. Ethan woke first. Catherine was asleep in his arms, her breathing steady and deep, her hair spread across his chest like dark water, her body warm against his, real, solid, alive. He thought about his mother, about the promise he'd made when he was 17 and stupid and thought words could stop death. About 15 years of keeping that promise like it was the only thing that mattered, like being pure was the same as being good, like isolation was the same as honor. And he realized something that should have been obvious years ago, but grief and fear had hidden. His mother hadn't wanted him to stay pure. She'd wanted him to wait for someone worth choosing, someone who'd make him want to build a life instead of just survive it, someone who'd make him want to be better, not through obligation, but through inspiration, through love. Catherine was that person, the woman his mother had wanted him to wait for, not perfect, broken, flawed, running from her own ghosts, but real, brave, worth the wait, worth the breaking. Breaking the promise wasn't betrayal, it was fulfillment. Ma, he whispered to the darkness, to the ghost he'd been carrying for 15 years, to the voice in his head that had kept him company when nothing else would. Keeping that promise didn't define me. Breaking it did. Made me a man worth Catherine's love. Made me someone who could choose life over safety. Made me human instead of just righteous. Catherine stirred, opened her eyes, looked at him in the dim firelight, smiled. Not a happy smile, not a satisfied smile, a peaceful smile. The smile of someone who'd made a choice and didn't regret it yet. You sorry yet? No, you thought, no, terrified but not sorry. Tomorrow we might die. Then we die having lived, having chosen, having been brave enough to break the rules when the rules were killing us. They made love again. Slower this time, more confident, less fumbling, less afraid. Two people who'd found each other in the middle of a storm and decided that this, whatever this was worth everything, worth the consequences, worth the risk, worth the knowing that it might all end tomorrow, but at least they'd have tonight. Dawn came cold and clear. The storm had passed. Outside, Blackwood's men were stirring, building up their fire, making breakfast. The siege continued. The waiting continued. The slow pressure of time and hunger and cold doing their work. Ethan and Catherine lay in bed holding each other, knowing that today they had to find a way out or accept dying together in this 12 by 16-foot cabin. Knowing that every hour brought them closer to surrender or starvation or some desperate move that would probably get them killed. We need to turn Henry, Ethan said, breaking the silence, breaking the moment of peace, returning to strategy, to survival, to the problem that wouldn't solve itself. How? Whatever Blackwood knows about Denver, about fatherhood, it's bad enough to keep Henry loyal through guilt, through fear of exposure. We offer him something better, protection, immunity, a way out, a chance to be the man he wants to be instead of the man Blackwood's made him. You think he'll take it? I think fear is a chain, but hope is a key. We give him hope. Maybe he unlocks himself. Maybe he finds the courage to do what he knows is right. Maybe. And if he doesn't, then we die fighting instead of starving. At least we go down swinging. At least we try. Catherine nodded. She understood. Sometimes the choice wasn't between winning and losing. It was between dying on your knees or dying on your feet, between accepting evil or opposing it even when opposition meant death, between being a victim or being a fighter. She chose fighter. They got dressed, made coffee, ate cold beans from last night, watched through the shutters as Blackwood's men rotated guards, watched Henry Brennan take the midday watch, noon to 3 p.m. alone, walking a perimeter around the camp, vulnerable, reachable. That was their window, their chance, their one shot at turning this around. Tonight, Ethan said, midnight, guard change, 15 minutes of confusion while they switch. We slip out the back window circle around approach Henry from behind. Talk to him. Convince him. Give him a choice. If he yells, we're dead. If he tells Blackwood, we're dead. If he refuses, we're dead. If we stay here, we're dead anyway. Just slower, colder, hungrier. At least this way we're trying. At least we're doing something instead of waiting for the end. Catherine looked at him, smiled, not a happy smile, a warrior's smile, the smile of someone who'd decided that death in battle was better than death from surrender. Then we try. We gamble everything on the hope that Henry Brennan has a soul worth saving, that somewhere under the fear and the guilt, there's still a good man trying to get out. They spent the day preparing, layering every warm thing they owned, 3 shirts each, 2 pairs of pants, furs over everything, packing dried meat and hardtack in a leather bag in case they had to run, in case everything went wrong and running was the only option left. Loading weapons, Ethan's pistol, Catherine's knife, his rifle staying behind, too big for sneaking, too loud for stealth. 6 p.m. Dutch Miller walked close to the cabin, close enough to be heard clearly, shouted with that cruel laugh in his voice. Running low on firewood yet, mountain man, must be getting cold in there. Maybe you should chop some. Oh wait, you can't come outside. Guess you'll just have to freeze or surrender your choice. He laughed, that horrible laugh, the laugh of a man who'd never suffered enough to understand compassion. Fired a rifle round into the cabin wall. The bullet punched through chinked logs 6 inches from Catherine's head, lodged in the far wall with a thunk that sounded like death knocking. Ethan's finger was on the trigger, every muscle screaming to return fire, to kill Dutch, to end this, to make him stop laughing, stop breathing, stop existing. Catherine grabbed his arm, hard, desperate. Don't. That's what he wants. Wants you to waste ammunition. Wants you to give away your position. Wants you angry and stupid. Don't give him the satisfaction. He lowered the rifle, shook with rage, with the desire to kill, with the knowledge that killing Dutch would doom them both, but God, it would feel good. It would feel right. Outside Blackwood's voice. Easy, Dutch. Don't damage my property. Sister Grace is worth money. Can't sell damaged goods. Keep her intact. We'll have our fun later, after she's been properly broken in. Property, goods, merchandise, things to be bought and sold and used and discarded. Catherine heard it. Her face went hard, all the softness draining away, replaced by something cold, something that looked like hate. See, she whispered, I'm just something to be bought and sold. Not a person, not a woman, just merchandise, just a commodity, just meat. Not to me. To me, you're everything. To me, you're the only thing that's mattered in 15 years. The only thing worth fighting for. Worth dying for. Evening. They waited. 8 p.m., 9, 10, 11:30, watching through the shutter as guards changed, seeing patterns, seeing routines. Seeing the 15-minute window between shifts when attention wandered and discipline slipped, and maybe just maybe 2 desperate people could slip through unnoticed. Henry Brennan took his position at midnight, walking slow circles around the camp, breath visible in the moonlight, alone, isolated from the others. Perfect. The other men went into tents, fires burning low, conserving fuel, just Henry awake in the dark, just Henry and his thoughts and the weight of what he'd done. what he'd been part of, what he'd become. Midnight. Time to move. Ethan opened the back window, north side away from the camp. Snow had drifted against it. 3 feet deep. He pushed through. It was cascading into the cabin. Catherine followed. The cold hit like a fist. 32 below zero. Breath freezing instantly before it could warm. Exposed skin going numb in seconds. The kind of cold that killed without drama, without violence. Just stopped things from working until they stopped working permanently. They crawled through snow, soaking their clothes, freezing, making themselves hypothermic on purpose because stealth required sacrifice. 200 yards to the creek bed. Took 15 minutes. Legs shaking from cold and exertion. Hearts pounding. Every breath a prayer. The frozen creek gave them cover. They followed it east 300 yards. Low. Invisible. Just 2 more shadows in a landscape of shadows. Entered the aspen grove. Bare branches rattling in the wind. Circled south toward Henry's position. Slow. Careful. One noise and this was over. 12:25 a.m. They were behind him, 20 yards. Close enough to see his breath. To hear his boots crunching snow. To smell tobacco smoke from his pipe. Ethan pulled his pistol, aimed at Henry's back. Not to shoot, just to convince. Just to make sure Henry understood this wasn't a request. Whispered Henry, "Don't move. Don't yell. We just want to talk." Henry froze, every muscle going rigid, hand moving toward his gun, stopping, calculating, realizing that turning around with a weapon would get him killed. "You're crazy." Henry's voice was barely audible, tight with fear. "Blackwood will kill us all 3 of us, slow. Make examples." Catherine stepped forward, pulled back her hood so he could see her face in the moonlight, so he could see she was real. Not a ghost, not a legend, just a woman, just Catherine. "Your brother Timothy sends his regards, Henry." Henry spun around, slowly, hands visible, empty, not reaching for a weapon, just turning, just seeing. "You know Timothy. Met him at the Franciscan gathering in Denver. 1884, he talked about you. Said you were his hero. Said you were a good man who'd fallen in with bad company but would find his way back. Said he prayed for you every night. For your redemption. For your salvation." Henry's voice broke. "He said that he called me good after everything. After all the things I've done. We know what you saw November 1st, Ethan said. Gentle but firm, stating facts, no judgment, just truth. You watched Dutch push Father Thomas from the bell tower. Watched him murder a priest. Watched him commit evil, and you did nothing. Said nothing. Became complicit through silence. I didn't know Dutch would do it." Henry's words tumbled out, fast, desperate. "Blackwood just said scare him. Just said make it clear that cooperation was better than resistance. I swear I didn't know Dutch would kill him. I swear." "Then help us stop him. Testify. Tell the U.S. Marshal what you saw, what Dutch did, what Blackwood ordered. End this. Be the man Timothy thinks you are instead of the man Blackwood's made you. Blackwood will kill me. He'll kill Timothy. He knows things that would destroy everything, things that would... How can he kill Timothy? He's in a monastery in Denver, protected, surrounded by brothers. Blackwood has reached, but not that far, not into the church itself." Henry's face crumpled. Tears froze on his cheeks, became ice, became visible proof of grief. "Timothy isn't my brother. He's my son." The words fell like stones into dark water, like confessions waited to sink forever. "Had him with a woman I wasn't married to. 1869. We were young, stupid, in love, or what we thought was love. She died in childbirth. Bled out, deity holding our baby. Died asking me to take care of him, to give him a good life, to make sure he became something better than what we were." Henry was crying fully now, not bothering to hide it, not bothering to pretend. "I gave the baby to the church, Franciscans. Told everyone he was my dead sister's kid, my nephew. Told him his mother and father died. Told him I was his uncle who'd raise him. Tried to be good to him, tried to make up for the lie. And he grew up good, grew up believing, became a monk, became everything I wasn't, became proof that good could come from sin if you loved enough. And Blackwood found out, Catherine said softly, understanding, seeing the lever, seeing the chain. Blackwood discovered the truth and threatens to tell Timothy, to destroy his faith, to make him hate you, to poison the one good thing in your life. If Timothy knows I'm his father, not his uncle, if he knows I lied to him for 25 years, he'll hate me. He'll leave the monastery. He'll lose his faith. He'll become like me. And I can't do that to him. Can't destroy the one pure thing I ever helped create. Ethan understood now, completely. The leverage wasn't money, wasn't fear of death, was love. Twisted love, protective love. The desire to preserve someone's innocence, even if it meant becoming more guilty yourself. Timothy deserves to know the truth, Catherine said softly, not judging, just stating. Lies destroy Henry, I know. I've been lying to myself for 18 years about why I became a nun, about whether I was running toward God or away from life. Lies eat you from inside until there's nothing left but guilt and fear. If Timothy knows he'll hate me, or he'll understand you were young and scared and did the best you could. Men forgive Henry, especially men of God, especially sons who learned their father loved them enough to give them up rather than drag them down. That's not a sin. That's sacrifice. Henry looked at them, two desperate people standing in 30 below zero, asking him to risk everything on hope, on the belief that truth was better than comfort, that redemption was possible, that becoming the man you should have been was worth losing the man you've become. What do you need? Victory, small, fragile, but real. Create a distraction tomorrow at dawn, set fire to the supply tent. In the confusion, we ride for Denver. Get the marshal, bring him back with proof, with testimony, with enough to arrest Blackwood and end this. Blackwood will suspect me. I'm the only one who'd have reason. Dutch is too stupid. The others are too loyal. Tell him the mountain man shot a fire arrow from the cabin. You tried to stop the fire, couldn't. Failed. It's believable. Blackwood expects you to fail. Uses that expectation against you. If this works, you'll protect Timothy, keep him safe, keep Blackwood from telling him. U.S. Marshal has federal witness protection. We tell the Marshal about Timothy, about the leverage, about the threat. He'll keep your son safe. Give you a chance to tell Timothy yourself, on your terms, with truth instead of fear. Henry stood silent for a long moment. Wind howled through the aspens. Snow fell gentle. The world waiting for his answer, for his choice, for the moment when he decided who he was going to be. Finally, he nodded. Dawn, 6 a.m., fire starts in the east supply tent. You ride north. Horses tied 400 yards that direction behind that rock formation. Take my mare, Chestnut, fastest horse in the group, fastest horse in the territory probably. Get to Denver, get the marshal, end this nightmare. They shook hands, deal made, alliance forged, hope kindled. Henry, Catherine said, voice soft, grateful. Thank you. You're saving more than just us. You're saving yourself, becoming the man you should have been, the man Timothy believes you are. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, we all die. Blackwood doesn't forgive, doesn't forget, doesn't show mercy. Then we die trying to do right. That's better than living on our knees, better than being what Blackwood wants us to be, better than accepting evil because fighting it is hard. They crawled back the way they came. Creek bed, grove, window. Inside by 1:15 a.m., soaked, frozen, shaking so hard their teeth rattled, but alive, and with a plan, and with hope. Catherine looked at Ethan. Think he'll do it. Think he'll find the courage. He's a father protecting his son. Fathers do impossible things when their children are at stake. He'll do it. He has to. It's his only way back to being human. They stripped off wet clothes, hung them by the fire, steam rising, wrapped in blankets together, sharing warmth, sharing bodies, sharing hope. 5 hours until dawn. 5 hours until everything changed. 5 hours until they either escaped or died trying. They didn't sleep, couldn't, just held each other, watching firelight dance on log walls, listening to wind and their own heartbeats and the quiet sound of two people who'd found something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Outside Blackwood's men slept. Henry Brennan walked his rounds thinking about sons and secrets and whether redemption was possible for a man who'd helped murder a priest. Thinking about tomorrow, about fire, about choosing truth over safety. Inside, Ethan and Catherine waited for dawn, waited for fire, waited for their one chance to escape or die trying. The clock ticked toward 6 a.m., toward freedom or death, toward justice or damnation, toward whatever came next, and neither of them regretted anything. Not the breaking, not the choosing, not the living. For once in their lives, they'd been brave enough to want something and reach for it, even knowing the cost. That was enough. That had to be enough. Tomorrow would decide the rest. December 27, 1886. Dawn, 5:45 a.m. The world was still dark, stars fading in the east where light would come soon. Temperature had dropped to 35 below during the night, the kind of cold that turned breath to ice crystals before they hit the ground, the kind of cold that made survival feel like a miracle instead of a given. Ethan and Catherine stood by the back window, dressed in layers. Every warm thing they owned piled on until they could barely move. Looked like bears more than people. Food packed in the leather bag, weapons loaded and checked 3 times. Ethan's pistol, Catherine's knife, hearts pounding against ribs like prisoners against bars, like drum beats before battle. Through the shutter, they watched Henry Brennan's silhouette moving near the supply tent, watched him check over his shoulder. Furtive, nervous. Watched him kneel down like he was tying his boot, like he was doing something innocent, something explainable. 5:58 a.m. 600 feet away, a man they barely knew was about to risk everything on the hope that redemption was possible, that becoming the person you should have been was worth destroying the person you'd become. 6 a.m., a lantern tipped, no accident, deliberate, calculated. Orange flame caught canvas. The supply tent erupted like it had been soaked in kerosene, which it had. Henry had made sure, had spent the night preparing, pouring fuel, creating the conditions for catastrophe. Fire, fire in camp, everyone up, fire! Henry's voice carried across the snow. Perfect panic, perfect performance. The terror of a man watching disaster unfold. Not the calculation of a man who'd caused it. Men stumbled from tents, half-dressed, confused, disoriented, sleep still in their eyes, running for water buckets, running for the burning supplies, running in circles like ants when you kick their hill. Everything chaos, everything exactly as planned. Blackwood appeared, pulling on his coat, hair wild, eyes sharp. How did this happen? Who was on watch? Mountain Man shot a fire arrow from the cabin. Henry pointed at a burning arrow stuck in the snow 20 feet from the tent. He'd planted it earlier, made it look like evidence, made it look real. I saw it, tried to stop the fire spreading, couldn't, everything's burning. Blackwood believed it. Why wouldn't he? His camp was burning, his supplies going up in smoke, food, ammunition, blankets, everything they brought. And Ethan Sullivan was known as a crack shot, known to be desperate, known to be exactly the kind of man who'd try something like this. Ethan pushed open the back window. Snow cascaded in, 3 feet of it. He went through first, dropped into a drift that came to his chest, sank like a stone, pulled himself forward, reached back for Catherine, pulled her after him. They ran, or tried to. Running in 5 feet of snow was more like swimming, more like drowning. Each step a battle, legs burning, lungs screaming in the cold air. Every breath like inhaling knives, north, 400 yards. Henry had said the horses were 400 yards north behind the rock formation. Had to trust him, had to believe he was telling the truth, had to hope this wasn't an elaborate trap. Behind them, the camp was still chaos. Men yelling, fire roaring, Blackwood screaming orders that contradicted each other. Nobody watching the north side. Nobody thinking that 2 desperate people would be stupid enough to run in this cold. In this snow, in this impossible situation, 200 yards, Ethan's legs were giving out. 32 years old and fit from mountain life, but this was beyond fitness, beyond endurance. This was pure will, pure desperation, pure refusal to quit even when quitting made sense. 300 yards. Catherine was falling behind, shorter legs, less strength, 40 years old and tough, but not built for this. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulled her, dragged her, wouldn't leave her, wouldn't let her fall. 350 yards. There, through the trees, behind the rocks, a horse, Henry's chestnut mare, saddled, ready, steam rising from her nostrils, beautiful in a law of and salvation. They reached her at 6:05 a.m. Ethan grabbed the saddle horn, pulled himself up, every muscle screaming, reached down for Catherine, hauled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, held on, tight, desperate. That's when Dutch Miller saw them. They're escaping North Blackwood. They're running. Gunfire erupted, bullets whining through air like angry hornets, hitting trees, throwing up snow, death reaching for them and missing by inches. Ethan kicked the mare. She lunged forward. Powerful. Fast. Henry had told the truth about that. Fastest horse in the territory. Fastest thing Ethan had ever ridden. Catherine behind him, arms around his waist, holding on like letting go meant death. Which it did. The chase began. Behind them, 5 men scrambled for the horses. Dutch Miller, Snake Eye Pete, Crooked Tom, Billy Wade. The deputy whose name Ethan had never learned and never would. All mounting, all riding hard, all knowing what failure meant. What Blackwood would do to them if they came back empty-handed. Blackwood stayed at camp. Too valuable to risk in a chase, too important. But his men knew that failing meant worse than death. Meant slow death, meant suffering, meant becoming examples. The mare was fast, gosh, she was fast, but she was carrying 2 people through deep snow. The pursuers had fresh horses, single riders, lighter loads. They were gaining, slowly, steadily, like death itself, like the inevitable. Mile 1, bullets hitting trees around them, bark exploding, branches falling. Ethan returned fire over his shoulder, one-handed, pistol bucking, wild shots, didn't hit anything but maybe scared them, maybe slowed them, maybe bought seconds that would mean the difference between living and dying. Mile 2. The mare was laboring, foam at her mouth white as the snow, breath coming in great gasps. She was giving everything, more than everything, running herself to death to save 2 people she'd never met. Catherine screamed. Ethan felt her jerk, felt hot blood on his back soaking through layers, felt her grip loosen. Catherine, keep going. Her voice was tight with pain, teeth gritted. It's just my shoulder, just a graze. Keep going. A bullet had caught her, not deep, grazed the meat of her shoulder, but bleeding, soaking through her coat, leaving a trail in the snow, a breadcrumb path for death to follow. Mile 3. They hit the main Denver road, wider, less snow, packed down by freight wagons and stagecoaches. The mare picked up speed. Flying now, hooves thundering, but the pursuers picked up more speed. They were 200 yards back now, 150. Closing, always closing. Ethan looked ahead, saw rock formations, natural defensive position, big boulders, cover, made a decision in half a heartbeat, made the only choice that gave them a chance. Hold on, we're stopping. What no, keep going. Can't outrun them on 1 horse, have to fight, hold on. He turned the mare toward the rocks, rode hard, hooves slipping on ice, almost falling, Catherine clinging to him, blood running down his back. Reached the rocks, dismounted, pulled Catherine down. Positioned her behind the biggest boulder. Granite, 4 feet tall, thick, would stop bullets. Maybe. Stay down, reload for me when I'm empty. Can you do that? She was pale, blood running down her arm, soaking her sleeve, but her eyes were clear, focused. She nodded. Ethan cocked his rifle, rested it on the rock, waited, heart pounding, breath visible, time slowing down the way it does before violence, before the moment when living and dying separate and you find out which side you're on. The 4 pursuers came on, spread out, smart, making themselves harder targets, cautious now. They'd seen where Ethan had gone to ground, Knew he had the advantage. Knew rushing in meant dying, but knew turning back meant Blackwood. Meant punishment, or worse than bullets. Dutch Miller called out. 300 yards in closing, voice carrying across the snow. Nowhere to run, mountain man. Give us the nun. Give her up and we let you live. Blackwood's word on it. Come get her. Come die. Dutch fired. Bullets spanged off granite inches from Ethan's head. Rock chips sprayed, cut his cheek. Blood running warm. First blood, not the last. Ethan aimed. Steady despite adrenaline, despite fear. Despite knowing that missing meant dying. Breath out, squeeze, don't pull, squeeze. The rifle kicked. The sound echoed across the valley like God's own thunder. Dutch's horse went down. The big gray gelding screamed. A sound no horse should make. Fell sideways like his legs had been cut. Dutch's leg caught underneath. Bone snapped. Audible even at 100 yards. A sound like dry wood breaking. Like something breaking that should never break. Dutch screamed too, high and thin and full of agony. The scream of a man who knows pain is just beginning. 1 down, 3 to go. Snake Eye Pete and Crooked Tom opened fire. Rapid shots. Boom, boom, boom. Suppressing fire. Trying to keep Ethan's head down while Billy Wade circled right. Classic tactics. Might even work if Ethan was stupid. If Catherine couldn't reload. If they had unlimited ammunition and time. But they didn't. Ethan saw the movement. Peripheral vision. Billy trying to flank. Trying to get an angle. Tracked him with the rifle. Led him. Calculated wind and distance and the arc of a bullet through cold air. Fired. The horse stumbled. Not hit. Just spooked. But at a gallop in deep snow that was enough. Billy went over its head. Flew through the air like a bird that forgot how to fly. Landed hard. Face first, didn't move. Neck probably broken. Dead or close enough not to matter. 2 down, 2 to go. Snake Eye Pete charged. Crazy bastard. Screaming, riding straight at the rocks like courage could stop bullets. Like rage was armor. Like dying fast was better than dying slow from Blackwood's anger. Ethan fired. Center mass. The way his father had taught him before running off. The one useful thing the bastard ever taught. Aim for the chest. Biggest target. Hardest to miss. The shot took Pete in the sternum. Right through the heart. He flew backward off his horse like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Hit the snow. Rolled once, stopped. Dead before he stopped, moving. 3 down, 1 to go. Just Crooked Tom left. And Tom was smarter than the others. Tom had seen 3 men die in 3 minutes. Tom knew when to quit. Tom was riding away, fast, back toward Blackwood's camp, back to report failure, back to face whatever punishment awaited men who let prisoners escape. Ethan let him go. Didn't have ammunition to waste on running targets. Didn't have the luxury of revenge. Just survival. Just making it 1 more minute, 1 more hour, 1 more day. Silence fell. Just wind and the sound of dying horses and Catherine's ragged breathing behind him. Just the aftermath, just the reckoning. He turned to her. She was holding her shoulder. Blood seeping between her fingers. Not arterial, not spraying, just oozing. Steady. She'd live. Probably. If infection didn't set in, if they got help soon. How bad? I'll manage. Her voice was tight. Teeth gritted against pain. Did we win? For now, Tom got away. He'll tell Blackwood. They'll come after us. Have to keep moving. Can't. Too cold. Too tired. Too... She swayed. Going pale. Blood loss. Shock. The adrenaline crash that comes after violence. That's when they heard it. The sound that changed everything. The sound of salvation or damnation depending on whose side God was on. Horses, many horses, coming from the south, from Silverton, coming fast. Ethan raised his rifle again. If Blackwood had sent reinforcements, this was over. He had maybe 15 rounds left. Couldn't hold off a dozen men. Couldn't protect Catherine and reload and shoot and survive. One of those things. Not all. The riders came into view. 8 men, federal badges gleaming on their coats, silver stars catching morning light. Official, legal, authority made manifest. Leading them was a man in his mid-40s. Hard face, harder eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen everything twice and stopped being surprised the first time. U.S. Marshal Joseph Reed. The marshal raised his hand. His men stopped. Perfect discipline, military precision. He rode forward alone, stopped 20 feet from the rocks, close enough to talk, far enough to be safe if this was a trap. "You, Ethan Sullivan." "Yes, sir." "Lower the rifle. We're not here for you. We're here for Silas Blackwood." Ethan didn't lower it, not yet. Didn't know if this was real, if he could trust them, if this was another trick, another betrayal, another way for Blackwood to win. "Who sent you?" "Father Bernard Kelly. Sent word 3 days ago requesting federal investigation of murder on church property." Marshal Reed's face was stone, professional, but something flickered in his eyes when he mentioned Father Bernard. Respect, maybe even friendship. One of the orphans ran to town December 24th with a message. Boy risked the storm to get it to the telegraph office. Brave kid, 11 years old, ran 8 miles in a blizzard to send a telegram. "We rode through the night from Denver. Got here an hour ago. Blackwood's men said you'd gone north. We followed." Father Bernard, crippled, broken, lying in bed with legs that would never heal. But not defeated, not giving up. Sending a child through a storm because he couldn't go himself. Because the children were braver than the men. Because sometimes the smallest people did the biggest things. Marshal Reed looked past Ethan, saw Catherine, saw the blood, saw the pallor. "That's Sister Grace Morrison." "Yes, sir. Catherine Morrison. She's hurt. Needs a doctor." The marshal nodded, turned to his deputies. "Miller, see to the lady. Field dress that wound. Rest of you secure the prisoners." He looked at the bodies, at Dutch screaming in the snow, at Billy Wade's corpse, at Snake Eye Pete growing cold. "Secure the living ones anyway." A deputy approached Catherine, young man, competent, started field dressing her wound. She winced but didn't cry out, didn't complain, just sat there pale and bleeding and alive. Another deputy approached Dutch, checked his leg, looked at the marshal, shook his head. "Compound fracture, bone through skin, gonna lose the leg, maybe die from infection anyway." "Stabilize him. He's got a trial to attend. Can die after he testifies." Dutch was screaming, begging, "Please, it hurts. God, it hurts. Give me something. Morphine, whiskey, something." "Should have thought of that before you murdered a priest," the marshal said. "No sympathy, no mercy, just facts. You'll get medical attention after you talk. Not before. Pain's good motivation for honesty." He turned back to Ethan, dismounted, walked closer, extended his hand. "Father Bernard is a friend, came from the same county in Ireland. Same village, actually. Grew up together. When I got word saying a priest had been murdered and a nun was in danger, I came quick as I could. Took 8 men and rode straight through. Didn't sleep, didn't stop, just rode." Ethan shook his hand, grip firm, honest. The handshake of a man who meant what he said. "Blackwood's still at my cabin, maybe 2 miles south, with 2 more men. Henry Brennan helped us escape." He turned. "He's the one who witnessed the murder." Henry Brennan, one of Blackwood's men, was, not anymore. He's got information, testimony. He'll talk if you protect his son. Son, a long story, but the leverage Blackwood has on Henry is the boy. You protect the boy, Henry tells you everything. About the murder, about the corruption, about all of it. Marshal Reed considered, calculated, made a decision. Federal witness protection. I can arrange that if his testimony's good, if it leads to convictions. He turned to his deputies. 4 of you ride to Sullivan's cabin. Arrest Silas Blackwood, Henry Brennan, and anyone else there. Charges are conspiracy to commit murder, attempted kidnapping, and whatever else we find when we dig. Use force if necessary. Bring them to Silverton. We'll sort it out in a courtroom." The deputies rode out, 4 men, armed, authorized. The law moving like a glacier, slow but inevitable. Marshal Reed looked at Catherine. "Sister, you're going to need medical attention and rest. Real rest. Not hiding in a root cellar rest. Then we ride to Silverton. This ends in a courtroom. Ends with justice. Real justice. Not Blackwood's version." I'm not a sister anymore, Catherine said quietly, voice weak but steady. Not after breaking my vows, not after choosing this. She looked at Ethan, smiled despite the pain, despite everything. I'm Catherine Morrison, and I'm free. For the first time in 18 years, I'm free. December 28th, 1886, Silverton, Courthouse. The courtroom was packed. 400 people in a space built for 200. Standing room only, pressed shoulder to shoulder. Everyone in Silverton had come to see this. The trial of Silas Blackwood, the richest man in the territory. The man who owned the sheriff and half the town and thought he owned everything else, including justice. Sitting in chains at the defendant's table. Also in chains, Dutch Miller, leg amputated below the knee, face gray with pain and infection, and the knowledge that death was coming, whether from the noose or the fever. Sheriff Briggs' badge stripped, looking smaller without it, looking like the nothing he'd always been under the uniform. Henry Brennan sitting with the prosecutors because he'd turned, because he'd chosen truth over fear, because he'd decided being his son's father mattered more than being Blackwood's creature. Judge Thomas Hartford presided, 58 years old, silver hair that looked like judgment made visible, face like weathered stone. He'd been a territorial judge for 20 years, seen every kind of crime, every kind of evil. But murder of a priest was something different, something that required justice, not just law, something that required righteousness, not just procedure. Ethan and Catherine sat in the front row. Her shoulder was bandaged. A doctor had cleaned and stitched the wound. 10 stitches. Said she was lucky. Said an inch to the left and the bullet would have hit bone. Would have shattered her shoulder and left her crippled. Would have taken her arm maybe. But luck had held. For once. The prosecution was a U.S. attorney from Denver, man named Harrison. Thin, sharp, the kind of lawyer who used words like scalpels, who cut through lies like butter, who made careers out of convicting powerful men who thought they were above the law. He called Henry Brennan first. Henry stood, walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, looked at Blackwood, looked away, couldn't hold his gaze, not anymore, not after choosing the other side. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Henry sat, looked at the jury, 12 men, miners, shopkeepers, ranchers, men who knew Blackwood's power, men who were brave enough to judge him anyway. Mr. Brennan, where were you on November 1st, 1886 at approximately 3 in the afternoon? St. Benedict's Mission bell tower. Murmurs through the courtroom. Judge Hartford's gavel came down. Once. Twice. Silence. What were you doing there? Mr. Blackwood sent me and Dutch Miller to talk to Father Thomas. Father Bernard was too weak. Father Thomas was visiting from Denver, helping with confessions and masses. Blackwood said Father Thomas owed him money for the mission, said we should convince him to pay. How were you supposed to convince him? Scare him. Blackwood said make it clear that bad things happen to people who don't pay debts. That cooperation was better than resistance, that the church wasn't above the law, wasn't above consequences. What happened in that bell tower? Henry's voice cracked, eyes wet, remembering, reliving. Father Thomas said he didn't owe any money, said Blackwood was lying, said the church land couldn't be mortgaged or sold, that it belonged to God. Dutch got angry, started yelling, said God doesn't pay bills, said God doesn't stop bullets. Father Thomas said he'd go to the territorial marshal. That Blackwood would hang for fraud. And then Dutch grabbed him. Father Thomas tried to pull away, tried to fight, but he was old, 60 years old maybe, weak. Dutch was strong. They struggled near the edge. Right at the edge where the railing was broken, where it had been broken for months and nobody had fixed it. And then Dutch just pushed him, shoved him right through the gap, pushed him off the tower. The courtroom erupted. Voices, gasps, shouts, people standing. Judge Hartford's gavel coming down like thunder, like the wrath of God. Order, I will have order, or I will clear this courtroom. Silence fell, heavy, horrified. The silence of people confronting evil. Mr. Brennan, are you saying Dutch Miller intentionally pushed Father Thomas from the bell tower? Yes, sir, intentionally, deliberately, with force, with the intent to kill. I watched him do it. Watched Father Thomas fall. Watched him scream. Watched him hit the stones. Heard the sound. I'll hear that sound till I die. Did Mr. Blackwood order this? Not directly, not in words. But when Dutch and I got back to town and told him what happened, Blackwood wasn't surprised, wasn't angry, wasn't shocked. He just smiled and said, "Good. Now Father Bernard will understand consequences. Now the church will sell." Like he'd expected it, like he'd wanted it, like Father Thomas dying was the plan all along. Blackwood's lawyer jumped up. Jonathan Hartford, the judge's son, 30 years old and already corrupted by gambling and ambition and the belief that defending the guilty made you clever instead of complicit. Objection, hearsay, and speculation. The witness is inferring intent from demeanor. Judge Hartford looked at his son. Something passed between them. Disappointment, shame. The recognition that Jonathan had become everything his father despised. Everything his father had spent a career fighting. Overruled. The witness may testify to what he heard directly and to observations of the defendant's reaction. Demeanor evidence is admissible. Continue, Mr. Harrison. Harrison continued. Relentless. Professional. Mr. Brennan, why are you testifying now? You've been silent for 2 months. You could have stayed silent. Could have kept Blackwood's secrets. Could have kept your position and your money and your safety. Why speak now? Because I have a son. Henry's voice broke completely, tears running down his face, not bothering to hide them, not bothering to pretend. His name is Timothy. He thinks I'm his uncle, but I'm his father. I gave him to the church when he was born, told him his parents died, lied to him for 25 years, made him into something good despite me, despite what I am. He looked at the jury, at the judge, at everyone. I don't want him growing up thinking his father was a murderer who got away with it. Don't want him learning the truth and realizing I was a coward, was complicit, was silent when I should have screamed. I can't give him back the truth about his parentage, but I can give him the truth about this, about justice, about doing the right thing even when it costs everything. Silence, complete, absolute. The kind of silence that comes when truth strips away every excuse. Harrison asked more questions. Henry answered them all. Described Dutch's face when he pushed. Described Father Thomas's scream. Described the sound of the body hitting stone. Described Blackwood's smile. Described 2 months of nightmares. 2 months of watching Father Bernard crippled and knowing and saying nothing, being complicit through silence. When Harrison was done, Jonathan Hartford tried to cross-examine, tried to paint Henry as a liar trying to save himself, tried to suggest this was revenge for being fired, tried to suggest this was a conspiracy, but the jury wasn't buying it. Henry's grief was too real, his shame too obvious, his testimony too detailed, too specific, too consistent with what Catherine would say, with what the evidence would show. Catherine testified next, described being in the chapel, hearing the struggle, seeing the shadow on the wall, seeing Dutch and Henry's horses riding away. Described running outside, finding Father Thomas's body, the blood, the broken bones, the angle of his neck that meant death was instant, meant he was gone before he hit. Then the physical evidence. Father Thomas's blood-stained crucifix found in Blackwood's safe when the marshal searched his house, kept as a trophy, as proof of power, and as a reminder that even priests could be killed, even the church could be threatened, even God couldn't protect the faithful from Blackwood's reach. Fake ledgers showing fabricated debts, records of payments to Sheriff Briggs, $40 a month, every month, for 3 years, enough to buy a badge, enough to own the law. The case against Blackwood was overwhelming. Mountains of evidence, multiple witnesses, physical proof, everything except Blackwood's confession. But Dutch Miller was the key. Dutch was scared. Dutch was dying. Dutch knew the noose was coming or the infection would take him. Either way, death was close. And dying men tell the truth when there's nothing left to lose. Harrison put him on the stand. Dutch refused to testify at first. Fifth Amendment, right against self-incrimination, right to remain silent, right to protect himself even when protection was impossible. But Dutch's lawyer made a mistake, made the kind of mistake that ends careers and destroys cases. He tried to argue that Dutch had acted alone, that Blackwood knew nothing, that this was all Dutch's idea, his initiative, his crime, his sin. Harrison pounced like a wolf on wounded prey. "So you admit your client pushed Father Thomas from the bell tower?" The lawyer froze, realized his error, tried to backtrack. I, I'm not saying you just said he acted alone. Alone in what? What action did Dutch Miller take alone? What action are you referring to if not the murder of Father Thomas? The lawyer looked at Dutch. Dutch was shaking, pale, sweating. The trap had closed. The net had tightened. Truth was the only way out, and truth meant death. "Your Honor, I need to consult with my client." "Too late, counselor. You've already made your argument. Now answer the prosecutor's question, or I'll hold you in contempt." The lawyer sat down, said nothing, gave up, abandoned his client the way rats abandon sinking ships. Harrison turned to Dutch, smiled, the smile of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. "Mr. Miller, did you push Father Thomas Kelly from the bell tower on November 1st, 1886? I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. Did Silas Blackwood pay you $500 to kill Father Thomas?" Fifth Amendment. Did Silas Blackwood order you to scare Father Thomas by pushing him from the tower? Fifth Amendment. Do you deny pushing Father Thomas? Dutch exploded. Pain and fear and infection and the knowledge that dying was coming broke him, shattered him, made him human for the first time in years. "He told me to." Blackwood said the priest had to go, said Father Thomas was visiting from Denver and nobody knew him, said make it look like an accident, said Father Bernard was too old to fight and Father Thomas was the problem, said he wanted that land and the church was in the way. It wasn't my fault he paid me $500 and told me to make it look like an accident, and I did what he paid me for. The courtroom went silent. Even the breathing stopped. Even the hearts. Dutch realized what he'd said. His face went white, whiter than it already was, the color of death. I didn't mean, I was confused. The pain, the infection. But it was done. Confession obtained, on record, under oath, in front of 12 jurors and a judge and 400 witnesses. Harrison smiled, cold, professional, the smile of justice served. "No further questions, Your Honor." The trial lasted 3 days, but the verdict was never in doubt, not after Dutch's confession, not after the evidence, not after Henry's testimony and Catherine's witness, and the ledgers and the crucifix and the mountains of proof that Blackwood had built his empire on blood and bones and broken promises. Silas Blackwood guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of fraud, guilty of attempted kidnapping, guilty on every count, every charge, every accusation proved beyond reasonable doubt. Sentenced 25 years in federal prison, Leavenworth, Kansas. Hard labor, no parole, no mercy. Dutch Miller, guilty of murder in the first degree, murder of a priest, murder with premeditation, murder for hire, sentenced death by hanging, execution set for April 15, 1887. 108 days to make peace with God and accept what was coming. Sheriff Briggs, guilty of conspiracy and bribery and obstruction of justice. Sentence 10 years. Badge stripped forever. Prohibited from ever holding public office. Prohibited from ever wearing a uniform. Reduced to nothing. Henry Brennan immunity granted in exchange for testimony. Required to leave the territory within 30 days. Permanent exile. Banishment. The price of redemption. The mission land was returned to the diocese. All debts nullified. All claims against the church dismissed. Blackwood's assets seized by federal marshals. $50,000 paid to St. Benedict's mission as restitution, as compensation, as acknowledgement that money couldn't buy back the dead but could help the living. Justice had been served. Cold and hard and final. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real. As real as anything human could be. But Catherine's trial was just beginning. December 30th, 1886, St. Mary's Catholic Church, Silverton. Bishop Michael O'Reilly had ridden from Denver. 3 days in winter cold, 60 years old and looking every year of it. Irish, face like carved oak, weathered, hard, unforgiving. He wore the full regalia, purple cassock that marked his authority, pectoral cross heavy with meaning, mitre that said he spoke for God. He looked like the wrath of the Almighty made flesh, like judgment personified. The church was packed, not for worship, for judgment, for condemnation, for the ritual destruction of a woman who dared to choose herself over obedience. Catherine stood at the back, not allowed to approach the altar. Excommunicated people couldn't enter sacred space, couldn't cross that invisible line between the profane and the holy. She wore a simple dress, gray wool, plain, no habit, no crucifix, no outward sign of the vows she'd broken. Just a woman, just Catherine. Not Sister Grace anymore. Never Sister Grace again. Ethan stood beside Shore. They weren't holding hands, not in church, not with the bishop glaring at them like they were demons wearing human skin, like they were corruption made visible, like their very presence polluted the sanctuary. The bishop spoke, his voice carried to the rafters. Strong, powerful. The voice of a man who'd never doubted, never questioned, never wondered if maybe, just maybe, the rules were wrong. Catherine Grace Morrison, you have violated sacred vows made before God and His holy church. You took solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Final vows, permanent vows, vows that bound you to Christ as His bride, vows that made you dead to the world and alive only to God. He pointed at Ethan. Several women in the congregation gasped, clutched their rosaries, made the sign of the cross like warding off evil. You have broken the vow of chastity through fornication with this man, through willful, deliberate, premeditated sin, through choosing flesh over spirit, through preferring earthly pleasure to heavenly reward. His voice rose, getting louder, getting angrier. You have abandoned your mission, abandoned the children in your care, abandoned your calling, abandoned everything holy for lust and weakness in the temptations of the world. You have brought scandal upon the church and shame upon the order of St. Francis. You have made a mockery of your vows, made a mockery of God Himself. The bishop raised his hand, made the sign of condemnation. The gesture, absolute, final, like slamming a door, like cutting a rope, like severing connection permanently. By the authority vested in me by the Holy Roman Catholic Church, by the power granted to me as bishop of this diocese, I hereby formally excommunicate you. You are cut off from the sacraments. You may not receive communion. You may not receive absolution. You may not enter church property. You may not claim the name Sister Grace. You are Catherine Morrison, a laywoman in mortal sin, cut off from the body of Christ, separated from the communion of saints, condemned to outer darkness unless you repent and do penance and beg forgiveness on your knees, Bremo. Catherine stood silent, took the condemnation without flinching, without crying, without begging. When the bishop finished, she spoke. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of a woman who'd made her choice and owned it. Your Excellency, do accept excommunication. I don't regret my choice. Shock rippled through the church, like an earthquake, like a tsunami. People standing, gasping, crossing themselves frantically. You don't repent. The bishop's voice rose to a shout, echoing, shaking the rafters. You stand before God and His church and you say you don't repent of fornication, of breaking sacred vows, of choosing damnation over salvation. I repent hiding from life for 18 years. I repent lying to myself about why I became a nun. I repent letting fear make my choices. But I don't repent finding love. I don't repent choosing life over death. I don't repent being brave enough to want something and reach for it, even knowing the kata. Love, the bishop spat the word like poison, like it burned his mouth. You call sin love. You call breaking vows to God love. You call fornication and adultery and spiritual suicide love. I call choosing life over death Love, I call standing up to a man who would have forced me into prostitution. Love, I call riding into a blizzard to save orphans. Love. I call finding someone who sees all my flaws and chooses me anyway. Love. Yes, I call that love. You could have appealed to church authorities. You could have asked for help. You could have trusted God to provide a voice from the congregation. Sarah Coleman, the widow who'd lost her husband defending mission land, standing in the back, fearless. Father Bernard was crippled, Your Excellency, pushed from a bell tower by Blackwood's men. Sheriff was bought. Judge's clerk was blackmailed. Who would protect her? Who would stand up to the richest man in the territory? Who would risk everything to save one nun and 14 orphans? The bishop turned, red-faced, angry. Who speaks? Sarah Coleman. My husband, John, died protecting that mission from claim jumpers 5 years ago. Died defending church property while the church stood by and did nothing. I watched Catherine Morrison run that mission alone for 2 years after Father Bernard was crippled. Feed those children on nothing. Teach them. Love them. Keep them alive when everyone else had given up. She's worth 10 of the men in this town who call themselves Christians. Worth 100 of the bishops who sit in comfort and judge from safety. More voices. A farmer. She saved my daughter from typhoid. Nursed her for 3 days when the doctor said she'd die. A shopkeeper. She taught my son to read for free when the school wouldn't take him because we couldn't pay a miner's wife. She delivered my baby when the midwife was drunk, saved both our lives. Not many voices, maybe 10 out of 200, but enough to create doubt, enough to show that condemnation wasn't unanimous, that some people at least saw courage instead of sin. Judge Hartford stood, tall, authoritative, the weight of territorial law behind him. Your Excellency, if I may, under territorial law, vows made under threat of force are invalid. Mr. Blackwood's ultimatum, prostitution or watch children starve, constituted coercion, duress. Legally, Sister Grace's vows were nullified the moment Blackwood threatened her. The law recognizes that consent obtained through threats is not consent at all. Church law and civil law are separate, Your Honor. The state has no authority over spiritual matters, no jurisdiction over vows made to God. Not in Colorado territory. The First Amendment protects religious freedom, but doesn't allow religious law to supersede civil law. Doesn't allow the church to enforce contracts made under duress. Catherine Morrison's vows are invalid under territorial statute. The territory will not recognize the church's right to punish her for breaking vows that were coerced. The bishop's face went red, purple, the color of rage barely contained, but he was smart enough to know he'd lost. Smart enough to know that church law couldn't override civil law. Not here, not in America. Not in a territory that valued individual liberty over institutional authority. The church cannot recognize any marriage she might enter. She remains excommunicated. She remains in mortal sin. But civil authorities may do as they will, may sanctify sin if they choose, may call fornication marriage if it pleases them. The church will not. The church cannot. The church never will. Ethan stepped forward, drew himself up, looked the bishop in the eye, refused to be intimidated, refused to be shamed. Then marry us, right here, right now, civil ceremony, legal under territorial law. Make it official, make it permanent, make it real. Catherine turned to him, surprise on her face, joy, fear, hope, everything mixed together. Ethan, I broke my promise for you, broke the only promise that ever mattered to me. I'll break every rule in Christendom if that's what it takes. Marry me, Catherine. Make it legal. Make it binding. Make it so nobody can say we're living in sin. Make it so our children, if we have them, are legitimate. Make it so you're my wife-in-law, even if the church refuses to bless it. She was crying, smiling through tears, nodding. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Judge Hartford stood, walked to the front of the church. The bishop tried to protest, but the judge ignored him, walked past him like he was furniture, like he was irrelevant. This is a civil ceremony under territorial law, authorized by my position as territorial judge. The church need not recognize it, but the territory will, the law will, and that's what matters. He stood before them, two people who'd found each other in a storm, two people who'd chosen life over safety, two people who'd rather be damned together than saved apart. Ethan Sullivan, do you take Catherine Grace Morrison as your lawful wife to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health until death do you part? I do. Catherine Morrison, do you take Ethan Sullivan as your lawful husband to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health until death do you part? I do. By the authority vested in me by Colorado territory, I pronounce you married. What the law has joined together, let no man separate. You may kiss your bride. They kissed, simple, brief, sacred in a way the church ceremony could never be. Sacred because it was chosen, because it was real, because it was theirs and nobody else's. Half the congregation stood and walked out. Couldn't stomach watching an excommunicated nun marry a mountain man in the church itself. Couldn't tolerate the sacrilege, the defiance, the audacity of choosing love over doctrine. The other half stayed, some out of support, some out of curiosity, some because they recognized courage when they saw it. Recognized that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to survive. That sometimes sin and salvation looked exactly the same, and only God knew the difference. Ethan and Catherine walked out of the church together, married, outcasts, free. Behind them, the bishop fumed, but there was nothing he could do. The law had spoken, the deed was done. The marriage was legal, whether the church blessed it or not. They rode back to Ethan's cabin that afternoon. Just the two of them, husband and wife, starting a life that neither had planned, but both had chosen. A life that would be hard and beautiful and real. A life worth living, even if heaven was forfeit, even if salvation was lost, even if the only paradise they'd ever know was the one they built together in 12 feet by 16 feet of rough log cabin at the edge of the world. January through March 1887. Winter. The town boycott was brutal, worse than brutal, systematic, organized. Half the merchants in Silverton refused to sell to them, turned them away at the door, put up signs. No service to the Sullivan household. Like they were diseased, like they were contagious. The fur buyers wouldn't take Ethan's pelts, said the quality was poor, said the market was bad, said anything except the truth, which was that Blackwood's friends still had power, still had influence, still had the ability to punish even from prison. Blackwood's influence persisted even with him in chains. His friends, his business partners, people who owed him money or favors or who just feared his memory, who thought that maybe someday he'd get out. He'd remember. He'd punish those who had helped his enemies. Ethan and Catherine survived on stored food, beans, flour, dried venison. The supplies ran low quickly, faster than expected. By February, they were eating one meal a day, sometimes less, saving everything they could, rationing like it was a siege, which it was, an economic siege, a war of attrition. Catherine learned to trap. Ethan taught her his roots, the 40-mile trap line. 250 traps scattered across mountains and valleys, freezing creeks and windswept ridges. She learned to skin beaver. Tan hides, set traps in frozen streams with hands that went numb in seconds. Learned to check for ice beneath snow. Learned to read animal signs. Learned to survive. She was good at it, better than good. She had patience, steady hands, no fear of blood or cold or hard work, no squeamishness about death. 18 years in a convent teaching children and nursing the sick had prepared her better than she knew. They became partners, not just in marriage, in survival, equal, sharing the load, sharing the danger, sharing everything. But it wasn't enough. Mid-February, they had $12 left, food for maybe 2 weeks. After that, starvation. Slow, certain, undramatic, just wasting away until there was nothing left. Ethan made a decision, made it quickly because hesitation meant death. We ride to Durango, 60 miles south, 3 days through winter. Fur buyers there don't know Blackwood, don't care about Silverton politics, don't care about excommunicated nuns and mountain men who married them. They just want quality pelts. And we have quality pelts. 3 days travel each way, in February, through country that kills people for fun. I know, but it's try or die, and I'd rather die trying than starve waiting. They packed 40 beaver pelts, everything Ethan had caught that season, everything they had to sell, mounted the chestnut mare that Henry Brennan had given them. His final gift, his apology, his attempt at redemption through generosity, rode south into country that could kill them just by being indifferent. The trip took 8 days, 3 days there through snow and cold, and one night when the temperature dropped to 40 below, and they huddled together under furs and prayed for dawn. 2 days in Durango selling and buying supplies and negotiating with buyers who drove hard bargains but were honest. 3 days back through weather that turned vicious, through a whiteout that almost killed them when they lost the trail and wandered for 6 hours in circles, but they made it. Sold the furs for $340, a fortune. Enough. Bought flour beans, coffee ammunition, fabric for Catherine to make new clothes. Warm clothes, practical clothes. Came back with enough to survive until spring. It was March 1st when they returned to the cabin. Both exhausted, both 20 pounds lighter, cheekbones sharp, eyes hollow, but alive. Still alive. Catherine had missed her monthly courses. Twice she was pregnant. Ethan held her when she told him, his hands shaking. Not from cold, from joy, from fear, from the weight of bringing new life into a world that was trying to kill them. We're going to have a family, going to have a child, going to create something good out of all this pain. I don't know how to be a mother. I've only known how to be a nun, only known how to be someone else's caretaker, never my own child's. You raised 14 orphans. You know how to love. That's all children need, love and food and warmth. We can provide that. We will provide that. They were happy. For 2 weeks they were happy. The first real happiness either had known in years, maybe ever. The happiness of creating instead of just surviving, of building instead of just enduring. Then March 15th came and happiness died. Catherine collapsed while checking the trap line. 2 miles from the cabin, severe cramping, bleeding. The kind of bleeding that meant ending. That meant loss. That meant the thing you wanted most slipping away like water through fingers. Ethan found her an hour later, followed her trail, found her unconscious in the snow, blood staining white, making flowers, making proof of death. He carried her back, carried her like she weighed nothing because fear made him strong. Later in bed, watched helplessly as her body rejected the pregnancy, as nature decided that 8 weeks wasn't enough, that malnutrition and stress and February cold had taken their toll, that some lives weren't meant to be. Miscarriage. 8 weeks along. Just 2 months. Just long enough to hope. Just long enough to imagine. Just long enough to love something that would never be. The baby was gone before it had a chance to be. Catherine woke to grief, to emptiness, to the knowledge that her body had failed. That she'd failed. That something was wrong with her. Broken, cursed, punished for breaking vows. She cried for 3 days, wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, wouldn't moyam, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling like it held answers. Like God might write forgiveness on rough wood if she looked long enough. God's punishing me, she said finally, voice flat, dead. Taking my baby because I broke my vows, because I chose you over him, because I'm a sinner and sinners don't deserve children, don't deserve joy, don't deserve anything but suffering. God's got nothing to do with it. Ethan's voice was hard, angry, not at her, at the universe, at the cruelty of it. You were starving. We both were. 20 pounds underweight, no fat, no reserves. Your body couldn't support a pregnancy. That's on Blackwood and this damn town that won't feed us. That's on starvation and boycotts and economic warfare. Not you, not God, not sin, just hunger, just biology, just bad luck. Maybe I should have stayed, Sister Grace. Maybe if I'd kept my vows, God would have protected me, protected the baby. Maybe this is proof I made the wrong choice. Stop. He grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm, made her look at him, made her see him. Listen to me. We'll have children. This isn't over. This is just bad luck and bad timing and a winter that tried to kill us. But we survived. We're still here. We're still breathing. We can try again. We will try again. But what if this happens again? What if my body can't? Then we adopt. Then we take in orphans the way you did at the mission. Then we build a family however we can. But even if we don't, even if it's just you and me forever, I'd still choose you. Every time, every day. You're worth more than any promise, any vow, any child we might have had. You're worth everything, and I'd do it all again knowing how it turned out. Every second of pain, every moment of loss. Worth it, because you're worth it. She cried in his arms, grieved the baby that would never be. The child that existed for 8 weeks and then didn't. The future that had seemed possible and now wasn't. But slowly over days and weeks she healed. Not completely. You don't heal completely from losing a child, from losing the hope of a child, but enough to live, enough to try again, enough to believe that maybe next time would be different. April 7, spring. The trial of Dutch Miller was quick. Federal court. Evidence overwhelming. Verdict predetermined. Just procedure. Just theater. Just the law going through motions toward an inevitable conclusion. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Murder of a priest. Murder for hire. Murder with premeditation and malice aforethought. Sentence death by hanging. April 15th. The whole town turned out for the execution. Morbid curiosity. Justice satisfied. The spectacle of death made legal. Made righteous. Made into something you could bring children to see. Ethan and Catherine watched from the edge of the crowd. Not celebrating. Not rejoicing. Just witnessing. Seeing justice done, even if justice felt hollow. Even if killing Dutch didn't bring Father Thomas back. Didn't undo the murder. Didn't heal the wound in the world. Dutch stood on the gallows, hands tied behind his back, hood over his head, black fabric that hid his face, hid his humanity, made him into a thing instead of a person, made killing easier. Noose around his neck. 13 coils, the traditional number. The number that was supposed to break the neck clean, supposed to make death instant, supposed to be merciful. His last words were short, muffled through the hood. Blackwood made me do it, made me into this. I'm sorry. God forgive me. I'm sorry. The trap dropped. Dutch fell. 6 feet. The rope went taut. His neck didn't break clean. The knot slipped. The angle was wrong. Something failed. It took 8 minutes for him to strangle. 8 minutes of twitching and jerking. 8 minutes of slow suffocation while the crowd watched in silence. While children cried. While men looked away. While women prayed or cursed or just stood there numb. When it was done, when Dutch finally stopped moving, people dispersed. Some satisfied, some sickened, and all aware that evil had been punished, but good hadn't been restored. That Father Thomas was still dead. That Blackwood was still alive in prison. That justice was real, but incomplete, always incomplete. Father Bernard had survived, but he'd never walk again. The fall had shattered his legs in ways no doctor could fix. Multiple fractures, nerve damage, permanent disability. He'd spend his remaining years in a chair, watching, remembering, carrying the guilt of not preventing what he couldn't have prevented. Blackwood was in federal prison in Kansas. Leavenworth, hard labor, 25 years. But his empire had been divided among his lieutenants. The corruption continued under new management. Different names, same system, same exploitation, same evil, just reorganized. The world wasn't fixed. Killing one evil man didn't end evil, didn't transform human nature, didn't make paradise out of the fallen world. But at least one murderer had paid the price. At least Father Thomas had some measure of justice. At least Catherine and Ethan could sleep knowing they'd fought and won, even if winning felt like losing. May 1887. The thaw. Snow melted. The world turned green. Rivers ran full with snowmelt and mountain runoff. Animals emerged from winter dens. Bears, elk, marmots whistling on rocks. Life returned like it always did, like it always would, indifferent to human drama, indifferent to suffering, Just the cycle continuing. Death and rebirth, winter and spring, loss and renewal. And so did allies. Sarah Coleman organized a quiet support network. 5 families who defied the boycott, who brought food to Ethan and Catherine. Fabric, seeds for planting, news from town, encouragement. Proof that not everyone in Silverton had chosen Blackwood's side. That some people at least valued courage over conformity. It wasn't much. 5 families out of 200. Just a fraction. Just a remnant. But it was enough to break the isolation. Enough to show that community could survive hate. That kindness could persist despite boycotts. That some people still knew right from wrong. Slowly over weeks more families joined. Not the majority. Maybe 20 out of 200 when everything shook out. But enough. Enough to trade with. Enough to survive. Some even apologized. Came to the cabin. Stood on the porch. Said, "We were wrong. You're good people. What happened to you wasn't right. We should have stood up sooner. We're sorry." Forgiveness came slow. Trust slower. Wounds don't heal just because someone says sorry. Scars remain. Memory remains. The knowledge that these people stood by while you starved remains. But it came. Eventually. Because holding grudges takes energy and they didn't have energy to spare. Because survival required allies. Because you can't build a future on revenge. And in June, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time they were careful. She stopped working the trap line. Stopped lifting heavy things. Stopped doing anything that might risk the pregnancy. Ate more. Rested. Let Ethan do the heavy work while she did the light work. Cooking, sewing, garden tending. Sarah Coleman visited weekly. Checked on her. Brought medical advice from her midwife days. Felt her belly. Listened to her heart. Said things looked good. Said the baby seemed strong. Said to keep doing what she was doing. The pregnancy held. Through summer heat, through fall cold, growing steady and strong, a bulge becoming visible. Movement felt. Kicks. Proof of life. Proof that maybe this time would be different. Ethan expanded the cabin, added a second room, 12 feet by 16 feet, a nursery for the child that was coming. Cut logs, chinked walls, built a roof, made a space for new life. He built a crib from pine, sanded smooth so no splinters would catch tiny skin. Catherine sewed blankets, made clothes, honey clothes, impossibly small. Hard to believe a human started that small. They prepared, hoped, prayed though neither was sure anyone was listening. Prayed anyway because what else could they do? Because hope required ritual, required faith, required the belief that maybe prayers mattered even if God seemed distant. November 15th, 1887. Birth. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain. Of Catherine screaming. Of Ethan pacing outside in the snow feeling helpless. Useless. Like everything he'd done to protect her didn't matter because he couldn't protect her from this. From birth. From the violence of bringing life into the world. Sarah Coleman and another midwife attended. Mary Hart. 2 women with experience. With knowledge. With the calm that comes from having done this dozens of times. Ethan paced outside. Walked circles in the snow. Wore a path. Listened to Catherine scream and wanted to break something. Wanted to make it stop. Wanted to take the pain himself. Wanted anything except this helpless waiting. At 2 in the morning he heard it. A baby's cry. High, thin, angry, the sound of life demanding to be heard. He ran inside, burst through the door, saw Catherine exhausted, sweating pale. Saw her smiling despite exhaustion. Saw her holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets he'd watched her sew. It's a girl. Ethan looked at his daughter, 7 pounds, perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, eyes screwed shut, mouth open, screaming her lungs out like she was angry at the world for taking so long to meet her, like she had opinions about being born and they were mostly negative. Sarah, Catherine said, voice weak but certain. We'll name her Sarah, after your mother, after the woman whose promise brought us together, after the woman who wanted you to wait for someone worth waiting for. Ethan took his daughter, held her in calloused hands that had killed men and skinned animals and built a life from nothing. held her like she was made of glass, like she might break, like she was the most precious thing in the world, which she was. Ma, he whispered, to the ghost, to the memory, to the woman who died 16 years ago and still shaped his life. I broke my promise, but I kept the spirit. I found a woman who makes me better, who makes me want to build instead of destroy, who makes me brave instead of safe. You'd love her. You'd love this little one too. He looked at Catherine, at Sarah, at the life they'd built from ruins, from loss, from choosing each other when choosing each other meant losing everything else. Keeping your promise didn't define me, Ma. Breaking it made me the man who could raise this girl right, made me someone worth being, made me a father. 30 years later, November 3rd, 1917, back in the cabin, back to the present, back to the frame where the story began. Ethan finishing his story for James. The fire had burned low, outside full dark. The wind had picked up, winter coming early this year like it did sometimes, like it would again. James sat silent, processing, trying to understand what his grandfather had told him, trying to reconcile the story with everything he thought he knew about promises and vows and the right way to live. So you broke your promise and lived happily ever after. Ethan laughed, bitter and knowing, the laugh of a man who'd lived long enough to know that fairy tales lied. Not quite that simple boy, not quite that clean, had 30 years with Catherine, 3 children who lived. Thomas is fighting in France right now. Robert is teaching in Denver. Sarah's got 3 children of her own. You're one of them. He poured more whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty. Last of the good stuff. Saved for occasions like this, like sending grandsons to war, like telling stories that mattered. But we also buried 2 babies. Mary died of fever at 6 months, burned up in 3 days. Nothing we could do. Just watched her die. Michael was stillborn, 1899. Came out blue and quiet. Never drew breath. Never opened his eyes. Just gone. Lost the ranch twice to bad winters, 1893 and 1902. Cattle froze, had to start over. Nearly starved more times than I can count. Town forgave us eventually, but it took a decade. 10 years of being outcast before people stopped crossing the street when they saw us coming. Tears ran down his weathered face. He didn't wipe them away, didn't hide them, just let them fall, because grief earned the right to be visible. Catherine died last April. Pneumonia took her quick. 3 days from first cough to last breath. Just like my mother, 46 years before. I held her hand at the end, watched her struggle for air, watched the light go out. She looked at me and said, worth it. Every day, every loss, every pain, worth it. Those were her last words. Worth it. Then she was gone. He drank, set down the cup, looked at his grandson with eyes that had seen too much death and not enough life. So no, not happily ever after. Just life, hard and beautiful and real. Joy and grief mixed together until you can't tell them apart. Can't have one without the other. Can't know love without knowing loss. Can't build anything that lasts without accepting that everything ends. James stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness, at the mountains invisible in the night, at the world that was about to swallow him whole. Sarah Miller is taking her final vows next week. You're saying I should stop her. I'm saying examine your reasons. Do you love her? Yes. Does she love you? She says she loves God more. Then ask her this. Ethan stood, walked to his grandson, put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Ask her if she's running to God or from life. If she's running from fear like Catherine was, like I was, then fight for her. Give her the choice. Show her there's another way. But if she genuinely loves God more than you, if her calling is real and true, and chosen, not feared, then let her go. Don't make her choose between you and her soul. That's a choice nobody should have to make. That's the kind of choice that destroys people. James was quiet for a long time, thinking, processing, making decisions that would shape the rest of his life. Finally, he nodded. I'll talk to her tonight, before she takes those vows, before it's too late. I'll give her the choice and respect whatever she chooses, even if it breaks me, even if I spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Good man, Ethan embraced his grandson, Held him like he'd held Sarah 30 years before, like he'd held Catherine 1,000 times. Held him and let him go because holding on meant preventing growth, meant preventing life. Now get, war's waiting, killing's waiting, death's waiting, and if you're half as stubborn as your grandfather, you'll come back alive. You'll come back to Sarah or someone else or just yourself. But you'll come back. You hear me? You come back. James picked up his rucksack, walked to the door, stopped, turned. Grandpa, do you regret it? Breaking your promise to Grandma Mary? Ethan looked at the cabin, at the life he'd built, at the children he'd raised, at the 30 years he'd had with a woman who'd ridden into his life during a blizzard and changed everything, at the horror and grief and love and loss that made up a human life. Every damn day for one reason. I regret waiting 32 years. Should have broken that promise at 22. Would have had 10 more years with Catherine. 10 more years of living instead of hiding. 10 more years of being brave instead of safe. That's my only regret. Not breaking the promise. Waiting so long to break it. He walked James to the door, opened it. Cold wind blasted in. The smell of winter. The smell of snow coming. The smell of change. People still ask if I'm sorry I broke my mother's dying wish for 3 nights with a runaway nun. I tell them this. He looked his grandson in the eyes, held his gaze, made sure the boy heard him. Really hurt him. Keeping that promise didn't define me, boy. Breaking it made me a man worth remembering. Made me a husband. Made me a father. Made me a grandfather. Made me someone who chose life over safety, love over loneliness, truth over comfortable lies. Made me human instead of just righteous. Made me alive instead of just pure. James nodded, understanding settling over him like snow, like acceptance, like the knowledge that comes when stories end and real life begins. Go, Ethan said. Talk to Sarah, then go fight, then come home. Build a life worth living. That's the only promise worth keeping. The promise to yourself, to live fully, to choose bravely, to love honestly even when love means loss. James walked into the darkness. His footsteps crunched on frozen ground, then silence, then nothing but wind and memory and the weight of stories told. Ethan closed the door, stood alone in the cabin, looked around at log walls that had sheltered 30 years of life. Joy and grief, birth and death, everything that made existence worth the struggle. Worth the pain, worth the knowing that it all ended eventually, but at least you'd been there. At least you'd lived. He walked outside, up the hill behind the cabin, to the small cemetery where 5 graves stood in a row, where stone marked the boundary between the living and the dead, where memory became monument. Catherine Grace Sullivan in 1846 to 1917. Beloved wife, mother, teacher. She chose life. Baby Mary Sullivan. 1896 to 1896, 6 months old. Fever took her. Baby Michael Sullivan, 1899, stillborn, never drew breath. 2 more graves, empty, waiting. 1 for Thomas if he didn't come back from France. 1 for Ethan when his time came. Soon, probably. 63 years old and feeling 90, feeling like the thread was wearing thin, like the clock was winding down. Ethan knelt at Catherine's grave. His knees ached. 63 years weighing heavy. Everything weighing heavy. The whole weight of living and losing and loving and letting go. Told the boy our story, the whole thing, every part, even the parts that hurt. Especially the parts that hurt. Think he'll be smart enough to choose life over fear. Think he'll be brave enough to reach for what he wants, even knowing that can hope so. His Sarah sounds like you. Stubborn, brave, scared, running from pain instead of toward joy. Hope he can save her from that. Save himself from that. The wind blew through pines, whispered secrets only the mountain understood. Only the dead knew. Miss you every day, every hour, every breath. 30 years wasn't enough. Should have had 50. Should have had forever. Should have had the fairy tale ending where we die in our sleep on the same night, holding hands and go to whatever comes next together. But we don't get fairy tales, we get life. And life is messy and hard and beautiful and brief. He placed his hand on the cold stone, felt the carved letters. her name, her dates, the summary of a life that had been so much more than stone could hold, so much more than words could capture, so much more than memory could preserve. But I don't regret it, not one second, not one choice, not one consequence. Breaking that promise to Ma, best thing I ever did, only thing that mattered, made me worthy of you, made me someone you could love, made me human enough to deserve the gift you gave me. He stood, looked at the mountains stretching away in all directions, white peaks against black sky, stars emerging as clouds cleared, the world vast and indifferent and beautiful, the world that had tried to kill them and failed, the world that had taken everything and given just enough back, the world that was still here, still turning, still offering chances to those brave enough to take them. Ethan spoke to the darkness, to his mother, to Catherine, to whatever listened when old men told their truths to the night. Keeping that promise didn't define me. Breaking it made me a man worth your love, made me someone who chose truth over comfort, life over death, love over loneliness, made me someone who'd ride through any storm to be with you. And I'd do it again, every time, every day, for the rest of whatever time I have left, every pain, every loss, every moment, worth it, was all worth it, because you were worth it. He walked back to the cabin, closed the door against the cold, fed the fire, poured the last of the whiskey. Outside, winter was coming. Inside, an old man sat by firelight remembering a blizzard and a nun, and 3 nights that changed everything. 3 nights that defined the next 30 years. 3 nights that made a life worth living even if living hurt. Even if loving meant losing. Even if choosing meant consequences he still carried. He'd kept his promise for 15 years, broke it in 3 days, spent 30 years living with the consequences, and he'd never once regretted it. Not the breaking, not the choosing, not the living. The fire burned low, the wind howled, and Ethan Sullivan, once called the waiting man, closed his eyes and dreamed of a woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes like creek bottom and a courage that had saved them both. The story was over, but the life it had created continued. In Sarah's children, in Thomas fighting overseas, in Robert teaching in Denver, in James who would talk to his Sarah tonight and make his own choice about promises and vows and whether love was worth the risk. The story lived on, as all good stories do, passed down, remembered, changing lives long after the people who lived them had returned to dust. And somewhere in the darkness, in a federal prison in Kansas, Silas Blackwood rotted, his empire scattered, his name cursed, his power broken by 2 people who'd refused to be bought or broken or silenced. 2 people who'd chosen each other over safety, who'd chosen truth over comfort, who'd chosen life over death. Justice wasn't clean, but it was real. And in a small cabin at 9,200 feet, an old mountain man slept by firelight and dreamed of redemption earned through courage and love found in the middle of a storm. The end of the story, the beginning of legacy, the price of freedom paid in full.